Should businesses be frightened of an incoming Labour government?
No, they should not be frightened of an incoming Labour government, because our country's economy relies on many small and medium-sized enterprises that are the motor of our economy, that often have great difficulty in accessing capital and accessing support for what they're trying to do. The biggest businesses will be asked to pay a little bit more in corporation tax, but it will be lower than it was in 2010, and indeed lower than the average for most industrial countries. What I want to do is ensure that there is an economy thriving in every part of the country, and so that means the resources. It means an infrastructure system, roads and railways all across the country. It means broadband in every part of our country that's free to everyone to use. And that will mean that businesses can be set up anywhere. It is also clear in our manifesto here that what we're keen to do is ensure there is a better trained workforce in our society, so we will be promoting apprenticeships and skill training at every level and give them the same value as academic education in universities. And so I enjoy working with all the business organisations, setting out clearly our views on public ownership, our views on taxation and our views on investment for the future.
OK, there's two people with their hands up. Let's hear from you both.
To be honest, Mr. Corbyn, I don't think it's businesses who should be scared just. I think it's everyone. Your reckless socialist ideas are genuinely terrifying to me.
Reckless socialist ideas?
And I think freedom will completely erode if we let you have the keys to number 10.
OK, before you answer, Mr. Corbyn, can I hear from you as well, please?
So what about the businesses that you're going to nationalise that then won't exist? So when you're saying about free internet, you know, the likes of Virgin and Sky, then they haven't got a product to sell.
The issue of your views on rights and freedoms in our society, I absolutely defend the right of free speech. I supported the introduction of the Human Rights Act. I support the Convention on Human Rights. Freedoms and rights in a democracy are very, very important. I've spent my life getting into hot water for defending people because I believe their human rights should not be violated, and that's the kind of...
What about Julian Assange?
Does guarantee...
What about his human rights?
Do you think this man is frightened of you being in power?
Well, I can't understand what everything that's going on in your mind that makes you say that, but what I would... maybe we can talk about it later.
And to the other point.
Just say this. I want to live in a society where we do deal with the worst aspects of poverty that exist in our society. We do invest properly in our schools. We do give all our children a real chance, and we do have a health service that is really there for all of us at all times. That's the kind of agenda that I've spent my life dealing with. The gentleman that asked a question about businesses, on the questions of public ownership, which you're quite right to raise, our proposals are that we will take our railways, which after all were invested in and built by the rest of us, back into public ownership. We'll take Royal Mail back into public ownership as it's a natural monopoly, and our water industry, which has been asset stripped to within an inch of its life by many of these water companies and wastes a great deal of water, will come back into public ownership, which will be run with consumer and worker involvement. The new announcement we made last week was on broadband. Because I believe that the government's proposals are insufficient, only 10% of households in the whole of the UK get access to fibre optic broadband. We will make that 100% within 10 years, starting in the areas, the remote areas of the country that have the least access at the moment. Hence, we can get the business development done in those places.
OK, let's hear a little bit more from the man in the white shirt.
Mr. Corbyn, I heard you talk about free speech and standing up for human rights. And I have two young daughters. And what terrifies me is I look at some of the Labour MPs, some female Labour MPs, and the misogyny that's happened in the Labour Party. They've been driven out the party. I look at a video on YouTube with Ruth Smith, particularly, because I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt in terms of maybe people are doing it in your name and not supported by you. But I look at a video of Ruth Smith online where she was in a press conference with you. And basically, Ruth Smith, a Jewish MP, was heckled out of that press conference. It's online, it's on YouTube. And there you are at the end of the press conference, chatting happily to that same heckler. I don't buy this whole nice old grandpa. I see that video, and that tells me all I need to know. And I'm terrified for my daughter because I see what you did in that video.
I was setting things up.
And I don't
done this at the
understand
last
how you can
moment,
say
but I
you stand
think
up
he
for human
mentioned
rights and
Ruth
free
Smith
speech
there.
when that's how you support a Labour MP at a Labour press conference. I think it's disgraceful.
Nobody
Yeah,
should.
you mentioned Ruth Smith. Just so you know,
Nobody
Ruth
should
Smith
suffer
is listed in
any
WikiLeaks in the
abuse in public
cables
life or
that they
privately.
released.
Clear.
Watch the video.
CIA asset, protected
Nobody should
asset.
suffer abuse.
Ruth Smith.
And many women Labour MPs, Ruth Smith included, and others, have suffered the most unbelievable levels of abuse. And it was a Labour MP, Jo Cox, who was murdered because she stood up in public life. I simply say to you that bad behaviour, misogynism, racism in any form is absolutely not acceptable in any form whatsoever in my party or in our society.
Then why? Then why?
Here we go.
Then why? And it's
That's the
online.
message.
Why were you talking happily and with a smile on your face to that same heckler when she's been heckled in tears out of the press conference? Why would Labour MPs, female MPs, need bodyguards at Labour conference? I just don't understand it, but it seems like we're not
I've
going to
had
come
many
to an agreement.
conversations with Ruth Smith since then. The
She's left the
gentleman
party.
concerned I'd known for many years, and I did say hello to him as I left the meeting, as you would somebody you'd
Go and
known
look
as
at the
well.
video,
And
Mr.
also,
Corbyn.
you don't know what was said between us.
Go and look at the video, Mr. Corbyn. and see
Okay,
if it's
thank you.
true.
No, we hear what you say. I mean, Mr. Corbyn, under your leadership, Labour has become the second political party after the BNP
Sorry?
Labour has become the second political party after the BNP to be investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. How do you feel to be in that kind of company?
It's our process that is being looked at, and I'm very happy about that. We've laid ourselves completely open to it. We're the party that, after all, set up the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and in government we will fund it properly. And I think it's right that our processes should be examined. We're the only party that actually has a full process to deal with abuse.
So are you
racism-
happy to
racism-
investigate
Which
racism
doesn't
in
work,
any
obviously,
form
because you
within
chucked out
our
Chris
Our
Williamson.
party or our society is simply not acceptable. We have suspended and expelled members that have been guilty of any racist activity.
And you've also suspended members who have not been guilty of it. This is his Achilles heel, this is, and it's not because of the anti-Semitism within his party. It's because he can't answer the goddamn question directly.
Who recently resigned and left.
He needs to
Bolivia
come out
Mexico.
fighting on that.
There's protests in Bolivia that have turned violent in support of Evo Morales, including food blockades that are starving cities like La Paz. So how are you supporting human rights in that regard when you're standing with somebody who has protests that support him that use such violent means to do so?
I met
That's a
Evo
coup.
Morales in Mexico last year. I had a very long
Bolivia
conversation with
is
him
a military
about his country,
coup.
about the economic development that's happened, and the numbers of people that have been taken out of poverty. Obviously, I follow what's going on in that country as I do in many other countries in the world.
And it's a
He
coup.
resigned from the presidency and now has moved out of Bolivia. I ask, and to support
Because
the
of
other
a coup.
Latin American governments that asked for a process of peace in Bolivia so that the constitution can be restored, so that democratic government can come back.
But that's not
That
what you-
surely is the right thing to do.
I agree, but that's not what you said in Twitter.
Two's
You said you
time.
stand by
Corbyn did
Evo
not do
Morales.
that,
You
the
took a position
PLP
in
did.
something.
Wrong, the
In
CLP
such a-
actually, not the
is-
PLP.
is
It's the
a-
NEC
a
that did
dispute
that.
right
But
now,
Corbyn
a
didn't
civil
say anything,
unrest
did he?
that any
He didn't
opinion
stand
one
up
way or
for him.
another is
He's
very
weak.
violent. So when you take a position in something
There
like
is, of course there is.
It emboldens
It's
the
obvious there
violence.
is. It's obvious there is civil unrest in Bolivia. There are very strong feelings on both sides about
Yes, civil
people that
unrest
feel
because
they've
there was a
been
military
let
coup.
down because Evo Morales is no longer president. Others that
Because there was a
probably don't
military
support him
coup.
at all.
Say
Surely
it.
the function now is to try and bring people together. I met Evo Morales last year. I've met him over. I've met him over the
He's
years.
weak,
and
this man
I
is. He's weak.
recognise that Bolivia, before he became president, was probably the poorest country in Latin America. It isn't now.
Okay. I'm sorry to shut you down. There's a lot
No,
of
it's
questions
not.
people want to get
It's
in. Let's hear a
actually,
question
if
from
you
Daniel.
look at the state of
Where
the
are you,
country
Daniel?
now compared to it was when he took it
Mr.
over.
Corbyn, will you campaign to remain?
It's done
or will you
incredible,
be
Bolivia has.
elected? Why would anyone vote Labour without knowing the answer to that question?
The only outlet that is reporting that there were any sort of irregularities with the election in Bolivia is the OAS, which is a state-funded, American-backed thing. That's who all the media outlets are using. It was a
However
coup.
they voted in the referendum in 2016.
But the question is, will you campaign to remain or
Yeah.
leave the EU if elected?
Can I answer it?
No, I'd love you
Thank
to
you.
answer it. That's it.
Right. One, we will negotiate a credible leave deal with the European Union. Let me finish, please. I'm trying to answer the gentleman's question. Secondly, we will put that alongside Remain in a referendum. My role and the role of our government will be to ensure that that referendum is held in a fair atmosphere, and we will abide by the result of it. And I will adopt, as Prime Minister, if I am at the time, a neutral stance so that I can credibly carry out the results of that to bring our communities and country together rather than continuing an endless debate about the EU and Brexit. This will be a trade deal with Europe or remaining in the EU. That will be the choice that we put before the British people within 6 months. Any other option will require years of negotiations either with the EU or the USA and put our public services at risk.
Daniel, does that answer your question?
We've already had 3.5 years of upheaval.
Hang on, we couldn't hear you. Does that answer your question?
We've already had 3.5 years of upheaval, and the British people voted in 2016, so why do we need to vote again?
Well, I think the demands of people to try to...
Good answer. Good question,
some
rather.
parties want to revoke Article 50. I actually voted to implement Article 50. Some people wanted a second referendum. Some people wanted
So the politicians,
leaving without any deal whatsoever.
the people
which
knew
I
what
think
they
would be
wanted. The
catastrophic to our
politicians
economy.
stood in the way.
People voted Remain, they voted Leave, but they didn't vote to lose their jobs. They didn't vote for deregulation. They didn't vote for damage to our economy. And I think it's only...
And they didn't
sensible
vote Remain
and reasonable
either.
to put that option back there to the people within 6 months in order to bring our country and society together, to face the future together, to bring about a fairer Britain.
Now Tomb's time. What I call weak is weak.
I mean, this thing about saying
He's weak.
You know, lots of people are groaning because he's saying that he's not going to take a clear position. There is actually precedence for this. You know, when there was a referendum on Europe in the 1970s, Harold Wilson remained neutral. Okay, so for people to say, oh, this is ridiculous that he's not taking a position, it's false. It's a false position. And actually, the Liberal Democrats are saying reverse Brexit, stop Brexit. Boris Johnson is saying get Brexit done. The only person that actually has a clear strategy, a grown-up, sensible strategy, is this man right here, Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, that guy needs to be hired for Jeremy Corbyn's campaign, because what he just said is actually better than what than Corbyn's answer.
It's the woman there.
Mr. Corbyn, I appreciate your efforts at bringing people together in this country. I understand your strategy. What I'm really interested in is that the Labour Party seems to be the only party which is developing a credible set of policies to deal with climate emergency.
Is she moving around like that for?
Could you enlighten us about what you think your Labour Party policies would do for jobs and for a good future for young people in Sheffield?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your question. We face a climate emergency across the whole world. It's very obvious. Unusual and extreme weather patterns have got worse and worse. The poorest and most vulnerable people in the poorest and most vulnerable places suffer first. Others suffer later. We signed up to the Paris Climate Change Accords in 2015. I was there.
Which wasn't enough.
I thought it was great, but it didn't go far enough, and it's got to go much further. So on May the 1st this year, I proposed to Parliament that we declare a climate emergency in our country, and that's now been replicated in many parliaments around the world, and I'm pleased about that. But it does mean we've got to play our part by reducing emissions to get to net zero emissions. It also means the possibilities of a huge number of jobs and development in our country in dealing with this emergency. It means jobs in retrofitting houses to make them environmentally sustainable, to make them better insulated, to use less energy. It means green energy jobs, wind, wave, solar. It means big projects like Swansea Bay Lagoon. It also means a lot has to be done in protecting our biodiversity, our seas and our rivers. And so our whole strategy is to develop a green industrial revolution which will create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the future, starting very, very quickly. And we will be therefore playing our part in getting to a more sustainable world. And a Labour government on the international stage will be working with others to get to net zero and make sure that by our trading policies we don't end up inadvertently exporting pollution by having strong controls here but not insisting on equally strong controls somewhere else.
Thank you very much.
I'm very excited by everything that's in our Green Industrial Revolution strategy, just as much as I admire those in the USA with the Green New Deal that they're putting forward.
OK, I'm going to take 3 or 4 points in the audience in a row, starting the woman over there.
Good answer.
I noticed in your opening speech that you mentioned about broadband again. At a time when the NHS is desperately in need of funding, and there's not an everlasting pot of money. Why do you think that's a good use of taxpayers' money?
OK, and let's hear from the man behind you there.
Well, he's going to give the NHS money as well.
After the election.
And 2 money trees, hasn't he?
How do we know that the deal you're going to get is going to be any better or even worse than what's already on offer? And therefore, are we being offered something that's not worth having Brexit in the first place? So really, it's not credible.
And the woman here in the black top.
Right.
Mr Corbyn, are you seriously saying that should you be in government, you would come back with the New Deal? It may be better than the Conservatives, it may not be, and then not campaign either way up until the referendum? The Labour Party wouldn't campaign Sole.
No,
well, we know some members of the Labour Party, some members of your
members
cabinet
of the Labour Party will do what they
would
want.
campaign for Remain. They've made it very clear.
OK. Can I deal with the broadband question first? Thank you for it. The issue is, as I said earlier, 95% of people in South Korea have access to broadband free. We have, in this country, 10% access, and it costs people roughly £30 a month. And it's quite selective, the areas.
It's not free in South Korea, though, is it?
For some people it is. I'm not sure about
but it's not a universal.
It is available for the whole country. Our point is that by investing in it, it actually promotes economic growth and brings about a degree of social justice. Listen, everyone in this room probably has a computer and uses access to broadband if they've got it, or some form of internet all the time. It is the normal form of communication. Yet there is a big digital divide between those that can afford the best and those that don't get any whatsoever. I just want to make sure it's equally available for all. And over 10 years, we would make sure that it is. And I think that's actually a sensible, up-to-date, modern way of looking at communications within our society.
But the question is, can we afford
and he'll
it?
piss off Richard Branson as well,
we
which
can't
is
afford it because
a big
if we don't afford it, then what's the effect on areas that don't have access to broadband, on their economic development, on the investments that might come there, on the businesses that won't go there? Listen, talk to a business about investing in, say, Cumbria or, say, parts of Northumbria, saying, would you open a factory or a shop or a small business here? They'd say, no. There's no broadband, there isn't good train access, there isn't good bus access or whatever else. We have to invest in social infrastructure and transport infrastructure for the whole country. Otherwise, the north-south divide, the inequalities between regions in England and between Scotland and Wales and England will simply get worse as a result of it. This is a serious proposal in order to help bring economic development to all parts of our country.
And what do you make of the comments made by the Institute of Fiscal Studies today What do you make of the comments made by the Institute of Fiscal Studies today that in order to pay for the broadband and all the other things that you're suggesting, well, what they're saying is you can't do that by pretending that you're just going to tax the very rich, the top 5%. You're going to have to tax an awful lot more of our audience.
I read the IFS comments.
You
very
print the
carefully,
money.
obviously. And we have here the grey book that we put forward,
MMT,
which actually funds and costs the whole of our programme and
if
manifesto.
we went to
And I was
war
absolutely
tomorrow,
insistent
we'd
that
find the money,
as
wouldn't
a party
we?
going into election, put that forward. It's only right that people should understand it.
And of
what
course
we're
they've looked
planning
at it.
is 95% of the population will pay no more whatsoever in tax. The top 5% will pay a bit more. Corporation
Top 5%
tax
will include a bit
go
more.
up to a maximum of 26%.
If you own a motorcycle racing team, chances are you're going to be in that 5%.
Many countries in other parts of the world, including major industrial economies. And we will then move into a situation where we become more or less mid-ranking in terms of provisions of funding of public services. We'll still be way below all the Scandinavian countries, France and Germany. What's happened in this country for too long is we've rolled back the public realm. We've rolled back on public services and loaded that problem onto individuals, families, and they're often paying with it through personal debt. I think we just need to rebalance a bit and start investing in people and communities as a whole, and that's what our manifesto does.
The woman at the back there.
This is you know what, this is a good performance by Corbyn so far. This is good so far.
Hi, I work for a charity that delivers digital inclusion. And it's not just about broadband, it's more than that. Giving broadband to households is great, but what are we going to do to make sure that we close the gap? People can use Facebook, people can use certain websites, but there's other things they can't do. They can't navigate public service websites,
That's a
NHS
haircut
advice.
and a half,
How are you going to ensure that people get that as well as broadband access?
Well, if they've got good quality broadband, obviously that's a start. And clearly there has to be full accessibility to public services online because there is, you're quite correct, a digital divide where public services increasingly, doctor's appointments and everything else are done online. And there are a significant number of people in the country that don't necessarily have smartphones, probably don't have computers and can't access those things, and that becomes a form of social exclusion. So I would always make it a requirement that public services must be available also in the more traditional ways as well, so that nobody is left out, because there's nothing worse than people that are told, for example, to go online to sort out their universal credit, can't get online because they haven't got a computer or a smartphone. How on earth are they supposed to access universal credit in that sense? That's why we will end universal credit and bring back
universal. You know what universal credit tell you to do in that situation? I know this, so I've heard them do it. They tell you to go to a library. If you haven't got an internet connection, say go to a library and log on there.
Very good, right? But one thing I want to ask, right? You're talking about delaying the Scottish independence referendum, and Boris Johnson's talking about refusing it, right? Is the UK like the Hotel California? You can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. I mean, and another thing, what gives Westminster, the last debate where you and the Prime Minister was on, right? There was 2 Westminster MPs telling Scotland what they're not getting. Surely you start listening to the Scottish people first.
I remember actually talking about that at the time.
That line before. Let's hear from Max
and saying how Scottish people would be pissed off at it. And I think
Scotland
there's your
voted
answer.
overwhelmingly against leaving Europe and for pro-independence government. Why will Labour not support us in deciding our own future?
Okay, thanks for your questions, and thanks for the way that you've put them. An incoming Labour government will invest a great deal across the UK, including £100 billion will go into Scotland over 10 years. That will be a massive game changer in Scotland, where you have the worst levels of poverty and health inequality in Glasgow. You have serious levels of child poverty and housing stress. You know that as well as I do.
Now, the question is, why will you not support it, or will you support a referendum?
And I've said that I don't see a priority in Scotland of having an independence referendum. What I see as a priority is investing in the social and capital needs of Scotland. And so, in the early years of a Labour government, we will not be supporting an independence referendum. Instead, we'll be investing in Scotland and working with whoever the government is in Scotland to deliver that programme, deliver that improvement in business infrastructure, in transport infrastructure, and in the social needs of the people of Scotland.
So just so we're clear, what does the early years mean? Is that year 2?
I was going to ask that.
Year 3? Year 4?
The early years, first 2 years, at least.
Okay.
So not in the
he's
first
not ruling
2
it out the
years.
first term.
He's
not ruling a referendum out in the first term there.
Investment programme for the whole of the UK.
No, I heard that. I heard that very clearly.
And that is
the question is,
and that will be our focus.
Yeah.
And so it will not be in the early part of the.
Could be the first term though.
So not in the first 2 years. So certainly not 2020, as Nicola Sturgeon wants. Yes, there's a man there in the black shirt. Yes, actually both got black shirts, so it's very confusing. Yes, in the black T-shirt.
So what gives it your right to be your priority if it's a priority of the Scottish people?
This is what I was saying the other night. Why is it up to them what Scotland do?
In 2021, and obviously an expression will come from that. It is, I think, our right as a party to put forward a programme for the whole of the UK, and that is what we're doing, an investment strategy for the whole of the UK, and I point out that Scotland will get 100 billion of investment under a Labour government, which will make a very significant difference to the lives of people all across Scotland. That, I'm sure, is something you would welcome.
Jeremy, there's already a mandate from Scottish people to have another referendum. No. Well, there is actually.
Yeah, there is
a mandate from last Scottish parliamentary elections, and the Scottish people have voted for that mandate.
We're putting forward a proposal which I think will be very beneficial to all parts of the UK, including Scotland. And I think you have to look at the situation of the income and expenditure levels as they affect Scotland. Surely Scotland needs to be able to address the problems it has and the industrial and green infrastructure investment that it absolutely needs. That's what Scotland are telling me.
So I'm sorry. I know you want to make your point. There's so many hands. It's not fair if I just give it all to you. Yes, the man here in the check shirt.
Yes, what you're saying is promising things for Scotland to try and avoid another independence referendum. It's very similar to what happened in 2014 with other promises made by senior Labour members with the fictitious vow. Okay. how on earth can we trust that this would not be another case of broken promises?
But since 2014, there's been a Tory government in the UK, and that's one of the problems.
Can we hear from the woman here?
Good answer. Good answer. That's a really good answer. Kick it over to the Tories.
In 2014, there was a triple mandate saying that we would be allowed to have a second vote if it went against the will of the people, and getting taken out of Europe is against the will of the people in Scotland.
Do you mind? I seem to have unerringly found all the stuff in the audience at once. Marvellous, so it is to have you, but there are lots of questions on other things. Will you forgive me if I see if I can... No, not you, matey, because I know you definitely want to ask about Scotland.
Can we have somebody who's not a Scots in other words?
Scotland?
Slightly.
Maybe then. We have very little time left, so we'll be very brief.
So if you had a choice of getting into power and signing up a deal with the SNP, that's not going to change, then you're not going to say, OK, Nicola, we'll give you what you want so we can get into power.
OK, that definitely is about Scotland. Everyone got his question? Yes, the man there.
It's not about Scotland. I just think, Jeremy, have you finally got an opportunity, after 9 years of the Tories, to get rid of the legacy of Thatcher and Blair and the market and the things that are in your manifesto that improve people's lives? The first question was about being frightened. I'm not frightened. I'm only frightened when I see people on the streets, when I see people can't get healthcare, all those things. Are you finally in a position, you win, and you can put it right?
OK, let's just hear from the woman in the green top at the back. The woman in the green top right at the back with the glasses on. No, the woman in the back in the green top, yes.
You say that you're not going to increase taxation, but I've read today that in your manifesto it states that you're going to abolish the married persons tax for couples on a lower combined income. I mean, how can that be fair? I mean, in the last year it cost something like £480 million. That's a drop in the ocean compared to what else you're planning on spending.
OK. I'll try and deal with some of those questions, if I may.
You've got about a minute left, I'm afraid, Mr Corbyn, so you're going to have to... You've got about a minute
no
left.
Pressure.
Quick fire round of answering those.
Quick. First of all, we're not doing any deals with any other parties. I'm not trying to form a coalition government. I'm fighting this election to win it for Labour, to win it for the people of this country, to end universal credit, deal with the issues of inequality, injustice and poverty, and deliver an economy that absolutely works for all. And our taxation proposals will affect the richest 5% of the people in this country. We will end the marriage tax allowance because I think it's discriminatory against non-married couples and it ought to be treated equally across the society, and individual taxation is a fairer way of doing things. So our manifesto, fully prepared, fully costed. I think this is an opportunity for our country to come together, deal with the inequality, injustice and poverty, and actually go forward to the future with some real degree of hope. Thank you,
Mr Corbyn, thank you.
All right.
And just to be clear, in a yes or no answer, you are telling us tonight that you will remain, just to be clear, in a yes or no answer, you're telling us tonight you will remain neutral on the issue of whether or not we should remain within the EU.
First heard here on question time.
First heard here on question time. Mr Corbyn, thank you very much indeed.
That was a good performance. It was a good performance. My problem with Jeremy Corbyn is he's not radical enough. He's not radical enough, and he takes a back seat when he should be front and centre on things.
There we are.
That's my problem
Don't
with
forget, in half an hour we'll be hearing from Joe Swinson, and after that, Boris Johnson.
That was going to be fun.
Can we please welcome the First Minister of Scotland and leader of the Scottish
Nicola
National
Sturgeon.
Party, Nicola Sturgeon.
This was a last-minute thing, by the way, guys, so that's why it wasn't... I suppose I've got to tweet it out, haven't I?
Good evening, First Minister.
Good
we
evening.
are delighted, of course, to have you here. And I'm going to say the same thing to you as I'm saying to all the party leaders. The aim is to allow time for our lovely audience here, who've got lots of questions, lots of opinions already, to put as many points to you as possible. So I'll be grateful to Party brief and to the point. And forgive me if I interrupt you. Of course. If you don't. So let's take our first question for Nicola Sturgeon from Shirley Duncan. Where are you? Yes, Shirley Duncan.
Sturgeon, if there's a hung parliament, what is the price of your cooperation with a minority government?
Well, obviously it's a very good and relevant question for everybody across the UK. The SNP may well hold the balance of power in a hung parliament after this election, and let me say we will use that influence, if we have it, responsibly and in the interests, of course, of standing up for Scotland, but also in the interests of progressive values for people right across the UK. Let me be very honest, I could not, in good conscience, ever put Boris Johnson into number 10 Downing Street.
I'll collect that. I'll give that a round of applause.
I've seen the misery that Tory policies have heaped upon people. Jeremy Corbyn may not be my choice of Labour leader, but I don't get to choose the Labour leader. So in terms of what I would seek to win from a minority Labour government, obviously I would ask for and expect Jeremy Corbyn to respect the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future, because it's not for Westminster to decide, it's for the people of Scotland.
This is what I was saying the other day.
An end to austerity. I would want to see an end to the misery of universal credit. I would want to see an NHS protection bill so that our NHS cannot be put at the mercy of Donald Trump in a trade deal. I would want to see fairer pensions for our older people. The UK is one of the lowest pensions in the OECD. So these are the progressive policies that the SNP would champion. Yes, for people in Scotland, but also for the benefit of people right across the UK.
OK, well, let's come back to this independence referendum, what we talked about already at some point. We've just heard the Labour leader saying that he would not offer you a second independence referendum for at least 2 years of a Labour government. You said, or you have said many times, you want to do that next year. So how's that going to work?
Well, you know, firstly, let me explain my position, and then I'll perhaps speculate on Jeremy Corbyn's, if I may.
Well, you don't need to speculate, because he told us right here. So would you accept it?
Speculate on what his position might be after the election, as opposed to what he said here today.
Oh, I see. OK.
But
good point.
My position is one of principle. There'll be differences of
if
opinion.
If Corbyn gets 280 seats in the election, his first call is going to be that lady there.
On Scottish independence.
And if it's not, people like me will be
to support independence,
screaming and shouting at him.
To accept the principle that is a question that should be decided by the people of Scotland, not by Westminster. Now, I guess if I can turn to the position that I think Jeremy Corbyn might take after an election, I've heard some of what Jeremy Corbyn's been saying to you this evening. He spoke with a lot of passion. I don't agree with him on everything, but I do agree with a great deal of what he was talking about public spending, health, austerity.
So, but the key thing is he said not for the first 2 years.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm coming on to. I'm asking you, having heard Jeremy Corbyn, do you think he's going to walk away from the chance to end austerity, to protect the NHS, to stop universal credit, simply because he wants for a couple of years to prevent Scotland to have the right to self-determination? Jeremy Corbyn supports the right of self-determination for almost every other country in the world. I'm not sure he's going to compromise the chance to have a Labour government for that issue.
So you think he's saying one thing to our audience and to everyone at home, and he's going to be saying another thing to you privately?
I agree,
look,
as well.
You're putting it maybe more bluntly, I would be more diplomatic.
Just calling it like it is.
But the point is, I lead a minority government in Scotland, so I know the compromises that you have to make to govern in that situation. Of course, he's putting a manifesto forward, but if he's in the position of needing the support of the SNP, then I think he will choose to do some of the things that are in his manifesto, and I don't think he'll turn his back on that in order to block the right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future. And I'd ask you to make your own minds up on that.
The man here in the front.
So are you saying that you would prioritise the Scottish independence referendum over ending austerity?
Look, I want the Scottish people to have the right to choose their own future, because fundamentally for Scotland, we've put up with... Scotland hasn't voted for a Conservative Westminster government for 60 years. But for 36 of those 60 years, we've had to put up with a Tory government. We are facing being taken out of the European Union against our will. I want Scotland to determine our own future. But in answer to your question, I will never put a Tory Prime Minister into power. I grew up in the west of Scotland. I saw the damage. I grew up in the Thatcher years. I saw the damage that Tory governments did to Scotland.
They'll throw her from the top of the ramparts of Edinburgh Castle if she went into league with the Tories.
If Jeremy Corbyn wants the support of the SNP, I don't think it should surprise people to hear me say that I would ask him to respect the right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future. And I don't think he'll turn his back on ending austerity.
I don't think he will either.
OK, well, you heard it here, folks.
I don't think it's...
I'm going to take a few questions.
What she's saying there, Nicola Sturgeon, is, listen, you know, if it comes to it and he gets something like 280 seats and we get 50-odd in Scotland, there's your working majority. There's your coalition government with the SNP. What she's saying is he's not going to turn his back on getting rid of all that austerity measures and all the other things because he doesn't want Scotland to have a referendum. Don't worry, we'll change his mind when it comes to it. That's what she's saying. And you know what? She's bloody 100% right.
Sorry, similar, I suppose. But
they're going to talk about this endlessly in the media. Or honestly, you know it's going to come up. Get your bingo cards ready. Scottish tail wagging the English dog. They're going to be saying that sort of stuff. What she said there is absolutely right. Corbyn will form a government with her in a nanosecond if, you know, that's the way it comes once the vote comes in.
Over the past few years, we've all borne witness to the farce of a Brexit negotiation. So if Scotland were to get its referendum and it were to win, what guarantees could you make to the rest of the Union that we wouldn't see the horrible result of the Brexit negotiations
if Scotland
with the
vote to leave,
of the hard
we're going to need a
borders and
wall.
customs unions and things like that?
Okay. Lots of different questions.
Have to have a wall.
I will try to do it as briefly as possible. On the question, very good question.
Or as Boris Johnson says, the Czechs
prioritising
won't be at the
independence
border.
over
The only
issues.
other
I
place
would
to
say
put
that
them is at the
evidence
border.
says no. Don't get me wrong, Scotland has challenges. All countries have challenges. As First Minister, I face challenges in our public services every single day, and my job is to confront those. But if you look at some of the policies, in Labour's manifesto published this week, if you take things like free prescriptions, free university education, restoring the nursing bursary, opposition to fracking, for example. These are all things that my government in Scotland has already done. So we're getting on with delivering those progressive policies, but we want to be in charge of our own future, not to turn our backs on the rest of the UK. We'll always be the closest friends and neighbours, but so that we don't get dragged down paths by
English
Tory
bastards
governments that we don't want to go down. The second question on
We've got a coalition with the English
there
bastards.
is a second EU referendum and the UK votes to remain. I hope that happens. I've campaigned and worked as hard as possible, as has the SNP, to try to find a way for the whole UK to stay in the EU, because I think that's the best future.
Because it's
And
such
then
a
they won't need to
democratic
call for an
organisation.
independence referendum because there won't be the material change that you talked about last time, which you need, according to yourself, to have one.
The case for independence doesn't rest solely on Brexit. Brexit is one example. It's a very extreme example.
I'd say
of the way in
Corbyn
which
did about an
Scotland
8,
is
8.5
treated
out of
with
10.
Contempt. Often
He was
by
pretty solid.
Westminster. And we've seen that over the past 3 years. We've tried to compromise,
She's
we've
been
tried to
excellent
find
so
ways
far.
to protect Scotland's interests, and that hasn't happened. So I think Scotland does need to make that choice about taking our future into our own hands. And thirdly, because this is a very good question about, will independence be as difficult as Brexit? And, you've probably noticed this, I oppose Brexit. I think Brexit is a big mistake. But what I don't think is that the mess that Brexit has become was inevitable. That was down to the fact that the Brexiteers, if I can be undiplomatic for a moment, told a lot of lies, on one of them on the side of a bus. It was down to the fact that there was no honesty or frankness about the implications, no planning done in advance, and then Theresa May came out with all these contradictory red lines that could never be reconciled. Contrast that with the independence referendum in 2014. Whether you agreed with the proposition or not, there was a very detailed proposition. We'd done the work, we'd done the thinking, we had a whole transition programme ready to go had the result gone the other way. So I don't think we should allow the Brexiteers, who made such a hash of Brexit, to tar all positive change with their brush. They messed it up. It doesn't mean others have to mess it up as well.
And you want a confirmatory referendum on Brexit. Would you also want a confirmatory referendum on your independence deal by the same token?
That is actually connected to the answer I've just given, because the reason why
I didn't hear that answer. Would you want a confirmatory referendum on your independence deal?
If you let me answer it in my own terms, if I may, because I was drawing the contrast between the mess of Brexit and the different approach taken for independence. I don't think it was inevitable that Brexit was a mess. Therefore, I don't think it was inevitable that we were in the position of having another referendum.
So would you want a confirmatory referendum?
Because I don't think...
so you want a referendum for Brexit, second one, but not for your independence deal.
The point I'm making is I don't think the position we're in right now with Brexit had to be like this. That was down to the bad planning, the lack of planning, which I don't think the proponents of independence would allow to happen.
Can we hear from Rebecca Ferguson? There you are.
Rebecca Ferguson.
So I'd like to know, irrespective of maybe if we leave the EU or not, if you are denied by government a second independence referendum for Scotland, what particular action will you take following that decision? And whether that's because they've said no, or whether because maybe Jeremy Corbyn's government are dragging their heels and it's going on and you were promised but you're not quite getting it, what action will you take?
Well, you know, people understandably ask me that all the time, and what I say, and I know it sounds like a typical politician's way of avoiding the answer before I say it, is...
Oh, no, we don't want that.
Well,
not tonight.
I know, because I genuinely don't like to answer questions that way, but if I come to that point, then I'll set out how I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. And yes, I've thought a lot about that, but I don't want to talk about that right now, because that is me conceding that these Westminster politicians actually have a right to block Scotland's ability to choose our own future. And actually, we're in an election campaign right now, and people in Scotland have an opportunity to send a very clear message that they want to be in charge of their own future, and that's what I'm asking them to do.
But the government does have a right to block it. Your government has the veto on it, you know.
Well, I don't think they've got a moral or a democratic right to block the right. Well, it's never been legally challenged, but I've always accepted, and I continue to accept, that the transfer of power is necessary and desirable. But I don't believe they've got a moral or democratic right. And we're in an election campaign, and there's an opportunity for Scotland to make that abundantly clear.
Surely if, obviously, you said you were trying not to give a politician's answer, because it would be almost conceding defeat, like they had a right to block the will of the Scottish people. But surely for people in Scotland, it would give them confidence that you will see through what they want if you actually set out your contingency plans for if it's denied to you. Surely you would want to bring Scotland together and actually tell them, actually, we are our own country, we have a right to determine our own future, and this is what we will do if we are denied it by this way.
No, I think that's a fair point. But what I'm saying to Scotland right now, and as I said, if I come to that point, then I will set out exactly to people in Scotland what I think we should do then. But what I'm saying to Scotland now, in a general election campaign, is we have the ability to send that message and make that view and that voice very clear. And that's what I hope people in Scotland will do for that reason. But I also hope they'll vote SNP so that we can contribute to all of these other social and economic policies that I've been talking about.
OK, there's a few hands up. Let's hear from them. The man there in the...
They're going to clean up in Scotland, the
In the
SNP
2014 referendum, the EU turned around to Scotland and said if they voted for independence, we'd be classed as a third state. So they'd be out basically voting to leave the EU in a sense, and they'd have to rejoin as an independent nation. How would you get round that? You argue that you're so against Brexit and so on, but surely your own independence is another form of Brexit.
It's a good point,
and
though,
also,
if we do
alongside that, Scotland has the issue of its deficit.
Won't.
How would you get Scotland's deficit down?
They've got to apply to
that
get
would
back
be
in, and that could
acceptable
take
to the EU
years.
to admit you. And you've got the issue of Spain. Would Spain admit you when they've got their own issues with separatists in Catalonia? Like, how will you get round that?
So Scotland has the largest deficit in Europe at 7%. It needs to be 3% or less in order to join the EU.
Can I take the gentleman's
questions?
questions
Just expanding on what he's saying.
There's a lot of questions in there. Let me try to take them in turn. Firstly, with the greatest respect, Europe didn't say that in 2014. Europe didn't make any comment about what would happen if Scotland voted for independence. It certainly didn't say that Scotland would not be allowed to be a member of the European Union. Some may have taken from their body language, they weren't that keen on it, but they didn't actually say that, nor has Spain ever said that it would veto the membership of an independent Scotland. What Spain has said is that if it is done constitutionally and legally, they would respect that. And, you know, I travel a lot around the European Union, and there's been a sea change in attitudes towards Scottish independence since Brexit, both in the institutions and in member states. The European Union, since it was first established, has sought to enlarge itself. I think the idea that it's going to try to kick out or not allow in part of a member state that has been there for 40 years is kind of inconceivable. On the deficit, can I firstly make this point? If you exclude London, because London skews a lot of the economic calculations for the UK, Scotland's deficit is not out of sync with the rest of the UK.
But the thing is, London is in the UK, so what's the point
in terms of, because Scotland is often treated as an outlier, London is actually the outlier.
London's the
Scotland
outlier.
is in line, but that
it's a good point.
We'll leave that point to one side, because I can see I'm not convincing you on it.
But what about you? But I mean, it doesn't really matter if it's convincing
me. That's a good point she's made.
But the other point is Scotland's deficit is falling. It fell by £1 billion in the most recent year. Our onshore revenues went up by £3 billion. But my more fundamental point is this. If the argument against independence is that Scotland has a big deficit, that is a deficit that has been accrued under the Westminster system of governance. And if we've got a big deficit because of that, that's not an argument for Scotland staying the same.
So
That's
you
an
don't,
argument
so
for
what
Scotland
responsibility
changing.
do you take for that?
Well, I don't control, as First Minister, the macroeconomic policies of the United Kingdom. I wish I did in some respects, but I don't. So Scotland does not take all of the decisions in our own government that govern these things. But the point I'm making is, if you look at independent countries similar in size to Scotland all over Europe, they're richer, they're more prosperous. Why shouldn't Scotland, with all the natural and human and social resources we have, be capable of emulating that if we have the powers to do that within our own hands?
The man in the check shirt.
Nicola, whoever promised...
What do you think in the chat, guys? I think she's been brilliant so far.
Whoever said
democracy.
Whoever promised it. I hear it from Boris Johnson, I hear it from Corbyn. Who actually promised once in a generation?
Look, if Brexit hadn't happened, do I think right now... I would still support independence, OK? I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But do I think right now we'd be standing here talking about having another independence referendum so imminently? Probably not. But circumstances have changed dramatically. And in a democracy...
Did anybody say promise?
In a democracy, when circumstances change, people have to have the right to change their mind. And if they don't have that right, then I don't believe what we're living in is a democracy. Now, I can't force Scotland to choose independence, just as I can't force the UK to stay in the EU, but I do believe we should have that choice so that whatever path we take as a country, whatever kind of country we are going to become, it's one we've chosen ourselves. It's not one that we've had the likes of Boris Johnson decide for us.
But was the word promise used?
By who, sorry?
Exactly.
Well, look, people said in
She's
2014...
good, but she's wrong about Spain, says
not to my
Francisco
knowledge.
Raposo. I agree,
Boris
mate.
Johnson keeps repeating it.
Okay.
Jeremy Corbyn keeps repeating it.
OK, we hear you. Okay. I think you've had your answer. Let's hear from a few more people in the audience. Yes, the woman there with the glasses.
So, in terms of the fact that Scotland needs to reduce its deficit in order to be allowed into the EU, does it therefore not make sense that independence wouldn't be a priority and Jeremy Corbyn's policies of putting more business and more infrastructure into Scotland should happen first so that you then can get into the EU?
And do you mind if I take a couple more points?
yeah.
And then, yes, the man here sitting right by me. I can't miss you.
Thank you. Nicola, our grandparents fought and died to protect Britain and the United Kingdom. How would you explain to them your desire to break up this country?
Yes, if you'd answer those two, please.
Firstly, on the point of EU membership, I mean, Scotland, whether we're in or out of the EU, wants to get its deficit down to sustainable levels. Most countries across the Western world have deficits, and we've set out plans to reduce that. It is reducing already. It's not a condition of joining the EU to meet those deficit levels. I want to see more investment in Scotland from whoever is in government in Westminster, which is why I've set out the policies that the SNP would want to see pursued. But our experience of Westminster governments over a long time is that investment doesn't always come. It's always also the case that if you want in Scotland to deprive Boris Johnson of a majority, then the way to do that is to vote SNP, because we're the main challengers in every Conservative seat. On the issue of our grandparents, my grandmother was from the north of England.
Ian Clark says, if I was a Scot, I'd want independence. I'm a Scouser, and since Thatcher, I've wanted Merseyside to join Scotland and bring the rest up north up there. You know, can we draw the line just below Wolverhampton, mate?
Social ties between Scotland,
we'll all go
England,
up there.
Wales, Northern Ireland will always be close. And I don't believe independence for Scotland is turning our backs on that. It's simply making sure that Scotland is in those relationships on the basis...
Got a better idea. Jasper Carrott had the idea in the 80s. What you do, you know the M25 around London, turn that into a moat, put a drawbridge, rest of the country can sort themselves out. London, you're on your own.
There was over 1,800 drug-related deaths in Scotland, the highest in Europe. They are 3 times more likely to have a drug death in Scotland than elsewhere in England and Wales. What are you doing about it, and what needs to be done to reverse this trend?
Well, that's a very good question. Firstly, some context for that is you're probably aware. Scotland, because of our sort of disproportionately high drug use back in the 1980s, there's an ageing cohort of drug users that have other health conditions, which is one, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons for that rising number of drugs deaths. It's a public health emergency. It's not acceptable. What we are doing about it, we're investing more money in drug treatment services. We've established a task force made up of experts, but also people with lived experience of drug use, to look at the different, more innovative things that we need to do. Power over the classification of drugs is still held at Westminster. One of the things that Glasgow City Council is wanting to do, and we're seeking the power in order to do that, is to establish in Glasgow what's called a safe consumption room, so that we can try to reduce some of the harm related to drugs. But this is one of the most important issues that we're facing in Scotland, and I think there is a real I know there is a real determination, but I think it exists across parties to do absolutely that.
The figures just now indicate that on trend to actually be higher this year. I think there's 500 odd drug deaths this year to date in relation to it. So is the policies working just now?
There is more to do. So some of these policies will be starting to have an effect, but it will take longer in some respects. So I'm not going to stand here and make promises about that I can't necessarily deliver in the year timescale that you're talking about. What I can say with absolute conviction is that there is a real determination to tackle this and to do what is required over whatever period is required. I don't want, not just to be First Minister of a country, I don't want to be a citizen of a country in which we've got people dying unnecessarily of drug use. So we are determined. If you take alcohol misuse, for example, which is not the same, we've implemented, for example, minimum unit pricing. So we've got a record as a country of doing really courageous things when it comes to public health, and we've got to show that same determination here too.
Is Jess Booth here somewhere? Is that you? I was trying to, because I know you have, from the questions you submitted, you have personal experience of this.
I do, yeah. Hi, I am a recovering addict. I had an issue with benzodiazepines, and in the report that the gentleman's referenced up there, you talk about older, people who have been through drug-related things in the 80s and things like that. But actually, one of the biggest contributors to the rise in deaths is around benzodiazepines and the amount that they are just prescribed to people who are in alcohol withdrawals or who are suffering from anxiety, suffering from mental health. And there seems to be a real lack of education around what these drugs can do to people and how quickly it can ruin your life. I came to the brink of death on these drugs, and I'm one of the lucky ones. And I feel like there is a situation that's not only being not really looked at properly in Scotland, but also throughout the whole of the UK.
Yeah, you've also got to look at the
socio-economic
factors that lead to areas having such a massive drug problem like that.
Given your,
it's all to do with poverty.
Given your experience, if you were willing, I would love to talk to you a bit more and perhaps put you in touch with some of the people within the Scottish Government that are working on this, because it's really important that we do listen to people who have experience so that we can learn from that and make sure that the policies we're taking forward properly reflect that. So if you are willing to leave your details there, I would love to follow that up.
Well done, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes, the woman here.
She's been great so far, I think.
If you were in a coalition government, what would you do to make sure that those outside London are better represented in Westminster, not just Scottish people?
Well, that's a very good... Can I just clarify firstly, not to dodge the question because I'll come on to it. I don't envisage being in a coalition government with Labour. I think it would be a less formal arrangement than that if we're in that situation. But, many of the areas of England suffer from much the same neglect as Scotland does and much the same contempt from Westminster as Scotland does. So the SNP will always try to stand up for decentralisation from London. Much of what we've been able to do, because we have a Scottish Parliament, some of the policies that Labour are now promising in their UK manifesto, I think with more power, with more devolution to some of the regions of England, would be possible there as well. So the SNP will always be a voice for decentralisation and more powers to be spread around.
So if you were in some kind of agreement, confidence supply, whatever it might be with a Labour minority government, should that come to pass, how much involvement do you see then, from that question, the SNP having in affairs south of the border? Do you see yourself actually getting stuck in terms of the laws that are passed
why not?
for the rest of the UK?
No, we would
Isn't it
always
confidence to
respect. So
supply?
we are responsible in Scotland for health policy and education, for example. I don't think it's right that we would seek to, no more right than it would be for Westminster to dictate to Scotland that we would dictate health policy or education policy in England, except where that affects Scotland, because often the decisions that are taken around Westminster on the health service, for example, have implications for our budget. And one of the big issues in the next Parliament, potentially, for the health service is trade deals. And we all have to come together, those of us who don't want our NHS sold off, to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we will seek to exercise influence, of course, in Scotland's interest, but where it is appropriate in the interests of people right across the UK.
The man here.
Hello. You've talked about economics and the deficit, and I know Scotland relies a lot because in order to have your freedom, you're going to need money to do this. And you mentioned resources, and the North Sea is one of these key areas that is often raised. Is it not important to let go of that now, to strand those assets and grow the natural resources like wind and tidal that Scotland is doing so much, and raise the money that way rather than the oil and gas industry?
In a word, you're right. I agree with the sentiment. So if I've got the time just to slightly unpack...
You've got about a minute, I'm
Scotland is already... Around about 80% of our electricity comes from renewable sources already. If we were to stop oil and gas production tomorrow, we would become more dependent on imports, which would actually increase the carbon footprint. So we've got to have a managed transition and a just transition. That transition is underway, rightly so. We've got to accelerate it. We've got a net zero target in Scotland, in law already, of net zero emissions by 2045. That's 5 years ahead of the rest of the UK. So we've got to power on with these things, and we're absolutely focused on doing it.
Right. Well, there's been quite a few questions.
She was great. Jeremy Corbyn was very good. I think she was better, to be honest. I would score her higher than Corbyn. But Corbyn did very well. She did even better, in my opinion. I think everybody in the chat pretty much agrees with me. I know one or two don't like her.
So we are halfway through.
But that was fine.
2 to go. Still got lots of energy? Yeah. No, great.
I will tell you this.
So we're going to end with the Prime
They're
Minister.
going to clean up
Boris
in
Johnson,
Scotland.
but first, let's welcome
The SNP
the
are.
leader of the Liberal
And
Democrats.
if the SNP are going to clean up, this woman is in trouble, because her constituency, remember, is East Dunbartonshire in Scotland.
So welcome.
She's
to
from
this
the Lib
leaders' question
Dems.
time. I'm gonna make the same
Don't
plea
let
to
that
you.
fool
You've
you.
probably heard it.
This is
Same
Margaret
plea for
Thatcher.
brevity and relevance. That's what we
Physical
want, isn't it?
embodiment of Margaret Thatcher.
And if you've
She
been watching,
votes
you'll know
with the
audience has
Tories
lots of questions.
more than 75%
So
of
let's
the
get stuck in.
Tories.
So our first question for you is from James McLaughlin.
Hi, how are you getting on?
Going to be
Yeah,
very well. Thanks, James.
Do you regret starting off the campaign by saying that you could be PM? And do you now agree how ridiculous that sounded?
Well, I'm glad you're starting with the easy ones. Look, I don't regret it, and I'll tell you why.
Go on then.
I think many of you might have watched that debate on Monday night between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah,
And
mate. Francisco.
I don't know how you felt about it.
Boris is
but
next.
When I watched that, I felt pretty dismayed with the thought that somehow that has to be the
Half-time.
choice,
I'm gonna
that
get a
that's
coffee.
all that we get to choose between. And I'm in the position of leading a political party that's standing in more than 600 seats at this election. And I'm proud to say that you don't have to make a choice between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. There is a better alternative, because I truly believe that our country deserves a better and brighter future than what either of them is offering right now. And I'm determined, in my role as Liberal Democrat leader, to do everything I possibly can to make that happen. There's
So
still
are you
3
still
weeks...
saying that you could be Prime Minister? That's the heart of the question.
There's still 3 weeks left in this campaign. And all I would say is to anybody that thinks that you can predict the outcome of the election in the middle of the campaign, ask Theresa May how that worked out.
I can predict that you won't be Prime Minister.
You would need a
I can predict
tsunami
that
of
now.
seats.
In fact, I will.
314. So
Joe Swinson
to answer
won't be
Deborah's
Prime
question,
Minister.
Are you still saying that you could be Prime Minister?
Look, I recognise that things have got much more challenging since Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage cooked up a deal to stitch up seats between them. I get that it is a big ask, but I am absolutely fighting for every Liberal Democrat vote and for every Liberal Democrat seat. And we do live in a world where sometimes...
yes or a no?
No, we do live in a world where sometimes strange things have happened in politics. You know, I didn't predict that Trump was going to become president. I didn't think Jeremy Corbyn was going to become leader of the Labour Party. So, you know, I think we've all made some predictions.
I wouldn't. So if you're predicting that you're going to be Prime Minister, I would say that.
Talk about the Lib Dems as a viable alternative to Labour
weight
or
behind
Tories. I'd just like to ask you, with 14 million UK citizens now living in poverty, do you regret consistently voting with the Conservatives in favour of harsh and uncaring benefit cuts? And how does that put you as...
Do you regret? That's the question. Do you regret it? Remember, she voted with the Tories. More than 75% of the Tories.
I absolutely recognise the issue that you're raising, and the bottom line is that there are far too many people in our country living in poverty, and life is too hard. And we did not get everything right.
So should we just look at your voting record? In government, you voted for the bedroom tax.
Yeah.
You frequently voted against raising benefits and frequently voted against paying higher benefits to people with illnesses or disabilities.
So, as I was saying, we didn't get everything right.
So you were a minister.
So you do regret it then?
You know, we also had plenty of fights with the Conservatives, and we won some of those fights, and we lost some of those fights. And I am sorry that we did not win more of those fights in coalition because of the reasons that you are outlining. Now, we did stop the Conservatives cutting 12 billion more from welfare. We did stop them bringing in the two-child cap, which they did, of course, when they were on their own in 2015. But I absolutely think that we have lessons to learn from that. I've learned those lessons, and if you look at what we're setting out, we are identifying 6 billion extra
Your
to
main
put into
pledge
universal credit to make sure that you don't have that
no
5-week
tuition
wait,
fees,
which is
no rise in
hurting
tuition
so
fees.
many people.
And
so
the
that we
first
get rid
thing
of
they
that
did when they
two-child
got
cap,
into
that we get rid of
coalition
the
with the
bedroom
Tories
tax. So
was
I
increase
get it.
tuition
We've got
fees
stuff
to
wrong,
9.5
and
grand.
we, in the future, going forward,
first thing.
are determined to get it right.
Does that satisfy you?
No.
Not at all, not in the slightest bit. You're still going to keep the universal credit, which everybody knows is not working at all. The Labour Party has made it absolutely clear that they're going to get rid of universal credit, and quite right. And I can't honestly say that I could ever trust, after what happened in Sheffield, and we know all about that in Sheffield, when the Lib Dems went into coalition with the Conservatives, how can we expect it to be believing anything you say on this issue?
This is the problem they've got. People remember, and they know what she
the way
is.
that you feel, and I might not be able to convince you on this, and I recognise that.
Tory.
You know, I do think that whatever, you know, scrapping universal credit on its own isn't some kind of magic bullet. We need to have a system that provides support to people. I think the biggest problems with universal credit is the lack of money that's in it, not the principle that you try to have a simpler.
You haven't seen universal credit then, love.
Multiple different payments.
The problem isn't money. The problem is
So I think the principle of making it simpler
it's the Tory
is a good
final
one,
solution.
but it needs to have the money behind it, and that's what we're setting out to do.
No, it's not money. It's already more expensive than the old system.
Two questions in a row from two named people. So can I hear from Catherine Fox and then Sue Lenkowski? So Catherine, that's you over there.
People with universal credit are not going to respect that answer.
17.4 million people that you think were stupid and didn't know what we were voting for.
Sue?
I'm a passionate Remainer. But the Liberal
Passionate
Democrats
Remainer.
standing on a manifesto to unilaterally cancel Brexit and the Electoral Pact has absolutely cost you my vote. The Liberal Democratic Party title is now a misnomer.
Liberal Democratic.
How can you defend that decision?
They're neither liberal nor
So
democratic.
you've got an unhappy Leaver and an unhappy Remainer.
Okay. I mean, what I would say in terms of our policy, look, we are being very straightforward as a party that we want to stop Brexit.
You know what?
You might
Titch
agree
just
with
said
us,
in the chat,
you might disagree
waffling.
with us. I don't think you can accuse us of not being upfront about wanting to stop Brexit. We have been crystal clear about that from the very beginning. Not for 1 second do I think that that means that you or anybody like you is stupid. I think it means we disagree. And I really want us to be in a situation in this country where we can disagree with each other, Catherine, and that means that you want to leave, and I don't think that makes you a bad person, and I want to remain in the EU, and I hope you think that doesn't make me a bad person.
You can disagree with me, but you lost.
And
you don't get to keep disagreeing. You don't get to change it because you lost.
Look, I haven't changed my view on whether I think we're better off in the European Union. And watching what I have seen in the last 3.5 years, watching in Parliament MPs who voted to leave, who want Brexit, unable to agree amongst themselves about what Brexit looks like. So Theresa May proposes a Brexit that Boris Johnson doesn't think is Brexity enough. Boris Johnson proposes a Brexit that, first of all, Nigel Farage says he can't handle, but then who knows what discussions they've had and what's been offered in order to get him on board. If even those MPs who have been putting forward Brexit can't agree, I tell you, I genuinely don't have confidence.
Is she honestly saying we should remain because Brexit is too hard?
Type of Brexit. And when the government analysis says that Brexit will make our country poorer and it will mean people lose their jobs and there is less money for our NHS, if we really don't think that there is a majority for any specific type of Brexit, I think it would be irresponsible to go ahead with that without at least checking. So we've argued for a people's vote.
OK,
and
but then what do you say?
No, you're full Remain. You want cancel. You want to cancel the referendum.
And if you don't, we will argue for a people's vote.
So what do you say to your former Lib Dem voter here?
You know, revote, you're not saying we'll go back to the people. You are unilaterally saying revoke it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, my love.
From somebody who wishes the last 3.5 years had never happened. There is no difference between the pair of us.
If she's getting it from both Remainers and Leavers, she's going to be in trouble.
You know, I suspect you want a people's vote.
That, to me, is the only way forward, recognising people who are strongly...
That'll sort it out.
So we have been leading the fight for a people's vote.
Nothing wrong with a vote, guys.
Yeah, but you're not now. You're now leading
vote was fine.
Vote for revoking Article 50.
17 times in Parliament we put down amendments to try to secure a people's vote. If Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party had backed that with sincerity, then we might be having a people's vote right now instead of a general election. But we are in a general election. You know, this is the essence of democracy. I am standing here and telling you honestly what I would do if I was elected as Prime Minister.
We had a vote, voted to leave, and she says it's the essence of democracy to revoke it.
I will do what I've said I will do. And that's the essence of democracy.
These two women in the front here. Let's hear from both of you.
You said you made some mistakes when you were in coalition with the Tories. So can you confirm whether you would go into a coalition with them again?
Certainly not under Boris Johnson. This Conservative Party is... You know,
what about Labour?
Farage.
Not under Corbyn.
Boris Johnson's been endorsed by Tommy Robinson. I mean, my goodness, they
so
are
what?
Far off the charts.
Who cares?
There's a woman at the back who's had a hand up for ages, yes.
Well, if Tommy Robinson had endorsed you, would it matter? No.
I'm a student, so we've been let down by the Lib Dems before.
Attacking people by association.
Yeah, that's the...
Making Tommy Robinson even more powerful.
Also kind of called out Boris and Nigel for making a deal, but the Lib Dems have been making pacts, and there's definitely been some misleading suggestions in their campaign. So I don't... What's different now? Why can we trust you now?
What do you mean misleading suggestions in their campaign?
There's been some claims made that they...
There was a slightly unfortunate bar chart, wasn't there, Ms Swinson, in the North East Tyneside literature, which suggested that we just kind of forgot all about the Brexit and the Labour Party in that bar chart and misrepresented the success of the Lib Dems in it.
I haven't seen that particular one, and it may well be that there was a problem with it. I think all bar charts should be properly labelled. It should be clear what they are explaining. I'm a bit of a data geek. I do like a bar chart. I will be fair.
But they often need to be right,
about that.
They?
Sorry?
They need to be right.
Yeah,
and that one wasn't.
They do need to be right, and it needs to be clear what it is representing. I absolutely take that point. But I mean, on that wider issue of trust, look, we absolutely got it wrong on tuition fees, and you know, I do apologise that we got that wrong and that we did that. What I think we have been doing in the last 3.5 years is standing really clearly as a pro-European, pro-Remain party. And we've not wavered from that. We've absolutely set that out. And that is what is at the centre of our manifesto this time. So you can see that we are sticking to our principles and what we believe in.
And do you think, just seeing the silence that fell into, do you think that the policy of revoking Article 50 has backfired?
Well, do you know, it is what we would do if we win a majority, right?
I just think we have to level and be straightforward about it. We are a pro-European party, we always have been. And if we fight an election on the basis of stopping Brexit and people give us a majority, don't be surprised if we then stop Brexit.
She's really struggling
but as I say,
here,
we
isn't
have
she?
led that campaign for a people's vote.
What do you think,
and
people?
We, with more Liberal Democrat MPs in the next Parliament, will campaign for a people's vote if we're not able to revoke.
Woman in the orange top.
She's really struggling here.
Yeah, my question is, so if, for me, I'm a Remainer, I voted to remain, I would like a people's vote, but for me, the Liberal Democrats seem more interested in just arguing with, rather than working in collaboration with other parties and other politicians. So for me, I don't see the point in that.
I don't see a question either.
Ruled out a coalition with Jeremy Corbyn, who of course was just standing here just a few moments ago, when they had promised a second referendum. They are surely your best hope to remain.
Well, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn also stood here and said that he would be neutral in that referendum. So I don't think that we, and the millions of people who want to remain in this country, can trust Jeremy Corbyn on Brexit.
Swinson Surge, says Sir Michael Hunt.
Which I thought was a very
Cool
powerful
name, mate.
exchange, was about what's happened in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn in terms of anti-Semitism. That they are being investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Oh.
He said he was happy about that. I don't think a party leader should be happy about that. I think you should be ashamed about that. And I just don't think that we can ignore the genuine fear that lots of people
Has she
feel
honestly
about Jeremy
pivoted
Corbyn
to the
being Prime Minister.
to attacking
So when it comes to
Corbyn over
working
anti-Semitism?
collaboratively, absolutely.
And what does that mean?
Let's just look at what we've done over the last couple of years, right? We are here, it is November. We are still members of the European Union. And we were supposed to leave on the 29th of March, and we were supposed to leave on the 31st of October. And for people that wanted to leave, if that was you, then I appreciate you're going to be frustrated by that. But as a party that wanted to stop Brexit, you know, we have worked collaboratively to make that happen. We've worked with people in the Labour Party, in the Conservative Party, in the SNP, in Plaid Cymru and the Greens. We have worked week in, week out, and we have
To stop
stopped Brexit
the thing that people
twice.
voted
Just
for.
imagine if you elect more Liberal Democrat MPs, what we will be able to achieve, and we'll be able to stop Brexit for good.
Well, there's a forest of hands. I'm going to go around a few people at once, if that's all right by you. Yes, the woman here in the black top.
You're talking a lot about working collaboratively with other parties, but your policy, in the unlikely event that you were elected Prime Minister with a majority, your policy of revoking Article 50 is just as divisive as the policies that are coming out from the kind of hard Brexiteers. How would you possibly imagine that you'd be able to bring the country together if you were elected and you revoked Article 50 and dismissed the views of all those people that voted leave? I'm a Remain voter. I come from a constituency, Rother Valley, that voted strongly to leave. How would you bring communities like that together under your government?
With you. The man here in the blue shirt. Yes, you.
I hear you talk about concern for the poor, but the reason people are poor are because of austerity, which you supported. Your deputy leader recently said that he wants the government to run a permanent surplus, which is essentially a more palatable way of saying permanent austerity. Why should we trust you not to further cripple our public services?
And the man there in the grey shirt.
You've apologised to students for the student debt debacle. You haven't said what you're going to do for them. So students are living with 50 grand worth
I was going
of
to
debt,
make that
paying
point, you know.
interest
She said a lot
from the
about
time they
what
start to study when they
she
can't
doesn't
possibly
want.
pay
She
it
doesn't
back.
want Brexit.
They're
She
paying
doesn't want this. She doesn't want the other. But she hasn't actually come out and said
We've created a
any
generation
policy. She doesn't put any
graduates
policies
with
forward
persistent
at all
debt to the
other than
state. It
we
just
don't
doesn't
want
hang,
Brexit. That's
true.
it.
So what are you going to do
Everything
for those
else that
people
she's done is
who've
just
created
been
a whole
waffle.
generation in persistent debt?
OK, so three completely different topics there.
So I absolutely recognise that so many people feel that this division that we have in our country right now is really horrible. It's really uncomfortable.
This is horrible, man.
In this room, there's people who are leave, remain, and so on, and I'm sure we all feel uncomfortable about that, and we kind of crave for and long for a feeling where that isn't there. All I would say is I don't think there's an easy answer to this, right? In Scotland, we've been living with this now for 8 years because of the run-up to the independence referendum, and the society is still very divided on those lines. So I don't think there's a quick fix, but I do think that many of the issues which people were unhappy about, that things don't, things are too tough, that, you know, the economy doesn't work well enough.
I think she's forgotten the question here.
I genuinely fear that those are going to be made worse by leaving the European Union. There's going to be less money about. I mean, to pick up the point about austerity, you know,
well, what this question is saying is that you'll make austerity worse by running a budget surplus.
I think she's forgotten the question.
Is that
she's
it's
waffling
leaving
so
the European
much.
Union that is going to unleash austerity on our country, because we are going to be poorer. People are going to lose their jobs. There will be less money for our NHS, and it will be worse. Whereas if we remain, then we will actually have more money to spend to be able to invest in our communities and in resolving many of the issues that people are unhappy about. So, you know, that's why I'm standing on that platform to say I want things to be better in our country, because I recognise that for too many people it has been too hard. And just in response to the point you make, look, you know, maintenance grants were being cut. We've said that we want to put those.
She's
back
using
because we
her
want to
time up
invest
here
in
by
those young
waffling.
people. We want to make sure that people can have access to funding for lifelong learning at different points throughout their lives. But I'm not going to stand here and promise that we're going to, abolish tuition fees. There's a lot of numbers that are getting thrown around by different parties in this election, and you know, a lot of the stuff sounds good. But can it actually be delivered? Do you actually, in your heart of hearts, believe that those sums add up when the IFS says that it's just not credible when you look at the Labour manifesto? So I'd rather be straightforward and honest with people, and
I think they should pay something, but I just think the balance is totally out of sync. We need to help these people.
Sure.
It's not about not paying anything, as the Labour government is suggesting. There needs to be a rebalance. So what is that rebalance?
Yeah, and I think we need to look
got
at
no
how we
answers.
invest in supporting particularly people from low
She's got no
incomes
answer
going
for it.
into university to get more people doing that. But if we really want to improve life chances, the best place to put that money is in the early years and in schools. That's how you get that social mobility. That's how you give young people opportunities, and that's where the priority for our spending is going. It's to make sure that we.
So she's going to redress the balance on the students who are now getting charged 10 grand this semester for their school by investing money into
schools crowdfunding for Pritt sticks
primary
and
schools.
exercise books. I mean, if that doesn't tell you that our schools are in dire need of more funding, what does?
OK, let's take a question from Aldous Everard. Whereabouts?
Best name ever.
Ah, there you are.
Hi, I'm sure that
Everhard.
the Liberal Democrats feel as if you must feel like you're in a bit between a rock and a hard place at the moment. Just wondering, would your conscience be clear if as a result of the dividing the Remain vote between Labour, semi-Remain, I know, but we've got that.
It won't. It won't divide the. It won't.
If you divide that Remain vote, will your
It
conscience
won't.
be clear if the Tories manage to get a majority as a result of that?
It doesn't matter. This is all poppycock. It's a stupid question, that is. It doesn't matter.
If you vote for Boris Johnson, he will use that vote to put through his hard Brexit deal.
You can also say that if you vote for the Brexit Party, you'll split it. Are you worried about splitting the vote
in this election? My conscience
with the Tories and
would
letting
not be
Corbyn
clear
in?
if I didn't make sure.
If you vote for the
that right across the
SNP,
country,
are you worried
people
about splitting the
have
vote
chance
between?
To vote for Remain.
You can frame that question for any party.
Brexit, because
It's
this
a
might
pointless
be
question.
the last chance that we have to stop it.
Oh, does that answer your question?
I fully agree. I am I'll put my, I am a Remainer as well, but I don't want this country not to go out of. I would rather that we went out of Europe than we didn't have another referendum. We need to have another referendum because we need to heal those wounds that have been caused by the initial referendum, which was so poorly worked out and which has been incredibly divisive for the country, for everyone.
And can I just say that, obviously, if there's more Liberal Democrats in that next Parliament, then that gives us more power to deliver that. But we also need to make sure
Nobody is going to give you Brexit. Okay? Nobody. Not her, not Corbyn, not Farage, none of them.
From Boris Johnson.
None of them.
There's lots of places in the country where that can happen. From what we're seeing is not the case that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are going to be able to win seats from the Conservatives. And that's why voting Liberal Democrat is the way to deprive Boris Johnson of a majority.
The man in the red tie.
Yeah, I've heard you this evening trying to defend your record on your vote, and then on the other hand, you'll say how you're against these horrible Tory cuts, and I really, really can't trust you. And you've got one difficult question, and you immediately tried to turn it round to anti-Semitism. Jeremy Corbyn has been fighting anti-Semitism and racism in all its forms since before you were born, and you've got some brass neck to stand up there and call
I love you.
I recognise that you genuinely believe that. But let me say, from the people that I've spoken to in the Labour Party, when I speak to Luciana
Blairites, by
who
any
joined the Liberal
chance?
Democrats, when I speak to Louise Ellman, who felt that she had to leave the Labour Party.
Lifelong anti-racist.
Right across the
You're
country,
calling a lifelong
they do not
anti-racist a
feel- they do not
racist.
feel that
You,
Jeremy Corbyn is
Joe
fighting
Swinson,
racism and
are a
anti-Semitism in the
disgrace.
Labour Party. They know what that feels like, and I'm going to listen to them and trust them on this issue.
Well, I'm going to listen to him because he made sense. And you have had a disaster.
Having voted a number of times for fracking, how can we be sure of your commitment to halting climate change?
Well, I'm against fracking.
So why did you
That's not what
vote
you said.
against a ban on it in 2015?
So, when we were in the coalition government, my Liberal Democrat colleague Ed Davey was the Energy Secretary, and he put in place very stringent regulation. But
Yes, you're deputy now, of course.
Indeed. But as a party, things have moved on. That was 4
She's
years
gone.
ago. We are against fracking. We want a ban on
That
fracking
question from that
because
guy,
the
it's
climate
Florida.
emergency is such that we shouldn't be starting new fossil
Hello,
fuel
darkness,
industries.
my old friend.
We need to be changing the way that we produce our energy, the way that we heat our homes. We need to be getting the carbon out of our everyday lives rapidly, and that means no new fossil fuel industries.
Really? Why is
such as
that?
fracking.
So you
Liberal
won't change your
Democrats are
mind
against
again, given that
fracking.
you voted against it, a ban on it in 2015. You're now
Voted
saying
against a ban on it.
that you do think it should be banned. You're not going to change your mind again.
I'm very clear. We would ban fracking.
This is like
Okay.
all the other policies that you
Is it
have.
in your manifesto?
They're Labour policies, and you are going on the back of what Labour are doing. You say that you'll do progressive policies, like childcare and Sure Start and all that kind of stuff, but you voted against it. You voted against it in the when you were in Tory government. You particularly, you yourself, have voted against progressive politics. And every time you are asked about something, you attack Labour. And you pretend to be somebody who is akin to Labour in some of those progressive policies. Well, I don't believe it. I don't think that you have progressive policies. I don't think that you have left-wing policies. I think that actually
This is a
the
car
Liberal
crash.
Democrats are a right-wing party, and they do not get my vote.
So's 3/4 of the Labour Party, love. Lib Dems are right wing. 3/4 of the Labour Party are right wing as well, but
You're entitled to that view, and if
the
you
problem.
support the Labour Party, and if you want socialism, and that's your viewpoint, then we're not a socialist party. I'm a liberal, and it's not some annex to the Labour Party.
you're a Tory pig with some lipstick on. That's what you are.
Fair,
You're a Tory pig with
inclusive
lipstick
country.
on.
We're an
You just
internationalist
face it.
party.
You're
That's
lipstick on the
why
pig of
we
the
want to
Tory
remain in the
party.
European Union
That's what
and
the
stop
Lib Dems
Brexit,
are.
because we
And that's
believe
what
that
you are.
You get further, you achieve more if you work with your closest neighbours. That's what we are standing for. That's what our values are. And sometimes we do agree with the Labour Party, but we are not the Labour Party. We're a different party. And that's why we're standing separately. We stand on our own 2 feet in this election.
Right at the back there.
Hiya.
We're
I
gonna
just
make a
kind of want to
prediction
follow
at
up
the
about
end
the
of
whole
this.
climate change, because recently on This Week you said you would be okay with using nuclear weapons. Can you please clarify why you think that would be okay?
Yeah, come on, Joe. You wanna nuke some people? Would you press the button? Would you press it? Would you press the button? Would you press it? Would you press the button? Would you press the button? Would you press
We
it?
live in a really dangerous world.
Yeah, but would
I
you
think
press it?
It feels like it is a much more uncertain
Would you press the
world
button?
than even a few years ago, when you have
You'd
President
press the
Trump
button
in
though,
the
wouldn't
White
you?
House with his volatile decisions in geopolitics. I don't think this is the time to get rid of our nuclear deterrent. I think that we need to keep our nuclear deterrent and that it keeps us safe.
Why don't we just get rid of it and not tell anybody we got rid of it?
is to
Because we're never going to have to use it, probably.
Away other nuclear
It's a
weapons.
deterrent.
And the UK should
Let's just get rid of it, but not tell anybody.
All of those,
I'm pretty sure that there was an
diplomatic
episode of Yes
discussions
Minister,
about
or
how
Yes
do we
Prime
create
Minister,
a
that
world
did that.
without
He
nuclear
suggests
weapons,
it's a
'cause that is what we
brilliant
want to
idea.
see. But we are not there. And while we are not there, then I do not want us to scrap our deterrent.
Man in the blue shirt.
Because she wants to press the button.
The party of missed opportunity when you
Why is
were in
it that-
coalition with the Conservatives
Oh.
and failed to stop them doing a number of things you
Would you
now
press the button?
reverse.
Every single
When the
election cycle.
Conservatives
Would you
were
press the button?
heavily in minority in government,
Would you press it?
just recently, you failed to put your pride to one side, team up with Corbyn and the others, and bring down the government, and then bring forward a referendum. We don't have to have this election. We could have avoided it.
But
You've got about 30 seconds, I'm
have
afraid.
to disagree. Just a couple of weeks before this election was called, the Liberal Democrats tabled again an amendment to have a people's vote, and the Labour Party refused to back it.
It was posturing and it was political manoeuvring is what it was, Joe Swinson, and anybody who was paying attention can tell that.
Hey, we introduced shared parental leave and gender pay gap reporting. You know, there was a whole host of things that we did achieve when we were in government, and I always want us to do more, and that's why I'm ambitious for our future, because our country can have a brighter future, and it starts with remaining in the European Union.
Our time is up, I'm afraid, Miss Swinson. Thank you very
That
much.
was a
indeed.
disaster
Please thank
for her.
Joe Swinson.
And I will tell you this, she lost her seat in the 2015 election. She only got it back in the last election. She lost her seat. She's in danger.
Okay, are you still
She's the
with us?
leader of the
This is
Lib
now the
Dems and
last
she's in
of
danger
our four
of losing
leaders.
her
Would you please
seat
welcome
a la
the
Nick
leader of the
Clegg
Conservative Party and, of course,
in the
the
last
Prime Minister,
election.
Boris Johnson.
You heard it here first. I think she's got a majority of about 5,000. She's in trouble because the SNP are really going to clean up in Scotland
Right,
and
so
her
if you've been watching
constituencies
the
up
programme
there.
so far,
She's
I
in
expect
trouble.
you have.
Quite a lot of it.
Wrapped with attention. You'll have heard me ask each leader to allow the audience time to ask as many questions as possible, so to keep your answers relevant and reasonably brief. And forgive me for interrupting you if you don't. So let's take our first question for Mr. Johnson, which is from May Rooks.
Hello, Prime Minister. I'd just like to ask you, how important is it for someone in your position of power to always tell the truth?
I think it's absolutely vital.
Vital that he tells the truth, he says.
I think it's absolutely vital, and I think that the issue of trust in politics is central to this election and fundamental to the corrosion of trust in politics at the moment.
So why do you think you're being asked that question?
Let's be clear, is the failure of politicians to deliver Brexit. Because the people of... Yes.
Here we go. He's where he brings out get Brexit done and dither and delay with the Labour Party and
I'm speaking from a
oven
WASPies,
ready.
and you know who the WASPies
He'll bring
are.
out the slogans in a second, I'm sure.
And take that forward. Are you still in that frame of mind that you're going to help us out? You're going to sort this pension issue?
Well, the WASPy issue, as everybody knows, is a very difficult problem caused by a change in the pension age for women who retired of a certain age. And I do sympathise deeply with the position of the WASPy women. And we have looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. And I would love to be able to magic you
Are you going to
a
take
solution.
action apart from looking?
It is
He looked
very
at it, looked at it,
expensive
looked at it.
to come up with the solution that you
Yeah.
want. And I'm going to be honest.
Did you
with
do the washing up
tonight.
today, Gordon?
cannot
I looked
promise
at
that
it.
I can magic up
I looked at
that
it and I
money for
looked
you,
at it, but
tonight, all the demands that the WASPy women make.
And yet we realise
are
that
going to look at it,
Brexit is
but
costing
it is
us.
not
Sorry, but there's
possible.
lots of-
It is
lots
not
of hands up.
possible to satisfy all the demands of the WASPy women.
Listen, I'm going to take a
put my
few-
hands up and confess that.
A few points, if I may. It's about 3 or 4. Can we start with you?
I think it's the most important point of this general election. Why are you refusing to release the report on Russian interference in British politics?
Because there's one in America that's got to come out first on the 9th of December, mate.
Why should you be Prime Minister if you constantly keep on avoiding scrutiny? You cancelled Parliament for 5 weeks. You ran away from Channel 4's debate, which is meant to be this Sunday, and you've banned the Daily Mirror from the Conservative bus.
The woman here in the blue dress.
So you keep saying that Leave is the will of the people, but I don't think I've ever heard you
That
address
report,
specific
Miles,
issues bringing
just
into
look at
question
the people
validity
who are
of the
in it.
referendum. So, for example, we know
Mifsud,
that the Leave campaign broke
Christopher
electoral
Steele.
spending rules and privacy
It's
laws.
not a danger to
We know
democracy,
that many
mate.
people voted to leave
No,
based on wrong
it's not a
information,
Russian
including what
threat.
was written on the side of a bus. We know that Leave was not defined and still isn't actually agreed upon today. And I'd love for you to address these issues. And
Yes.
also, actually, talk about why you think you've got a mandate to go through with Brexit, because I don't think you can say that this general election can be your mandate when Brexit is mixed in with healthcare and climate change and education.
Well, thank you. Just on your... On, some of these points, you know, why are we having this election? Why am I allegedly avoiding scrutiny? Well, here I am, and very happy to be scrutinised. But on your point about the reasons for having the election, let's be in no doubt. I didn't want to have.
He had a majority of minus
no Prime Minister
43.
have an election on December the 12th. We had to do it because Parliament is blocking Brexit, and I'm afraid.
Now, hang on,
Not Parliament.
that's not quite right.
That's not a question either.
Voted to accept a reading of your bill. They then didn't want to do it in just 3 days.
They were given every opportunity to pass it, and they passed a law to insist that we extended beyond October the 31st. And what we have now is a situation in which the other three party leaders either want to block Brexit or absurdly want to have a second referendum on the EU without, and that's I think Mr Corbyn's position. It seems to have mutated tonight. He's now going to be neutral on the deal that he proposes to do. I don't see how he can do a deal when he's going to be neutral
is this answering your question?
about the deal that he wants to do. Never mind that. I do not think whatever deal Mr Corbyn proposes, I don't think it's sensible for this great country of ours to spend next year in yet more delectable disputations about the EU and then another referendum, if I understood correctly.
He's going to say dither and delay.
Another referendum on Scotland. How can that be right for our country? I want next year to be a fantastic year for our country. We're a very ambitious, one-nation Conservative government. We have amazing plans for this country, investing in education, investing in health, and that's what we want to get on with. We need to get Brexit done to do it.
Get Brexit done.
There we go. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry.
Anybody's got
Took
that on
about
his
3
Brexit
minutes to get
bingo
that phrase in.
card,
I wonder
the
how long it
card.
would take. Yes.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, whilst you claim the economy is doing really well, how can you justify, for example, in my constituency where I work as a senior leader in a secondary school, how can you justify that 40% of the children in my community are living in poverty? And
The economy's doing brilliant.
Many more people are homeless, and many people who are working, perhaps on 40-hour contracts a week, are having to use food banks. So how can you justify this?
Well, I can't. Where are you teaching? Whereabouts is your school?
In Stannington, towards Hillsworth, Sheffield.
Okay, you're from nearby.
Yeah.
Well, listen. I want you to know that I've been in office for about 120 days or so as Prime Minister, and I do understand. And I've been to many hospitals, many schools in the time that I've been Prime Minister. And I've talked to nurses and doctors and teachers about what's going on in their schools, and that's why we're now levelling up funding for education across this country, putting more money into both primary and secondary schools, and I want to see that going directly to your school. But I just make the
Mr.
crucial
Johnson,
point.
this is a
We
question
cannot-
about your record. You say you've been Prime Minister for about 120 days, which of course is true, but the Conservatives have been in power for 9 years.
Absolutely. And that's a fair point, Fiona. But I would point out to you, for most of that time, I was running London, and when I was running London, we reduced the gap between rich and poor.
You were also
and
in
we did it. And one of the things I did, which we've now brought into government, we introduced the living wage, or massively expanded the living wage when I was Mayor of London. That became a national policy. George Osborne nicked it from me. I was act of theft. I was perfectly happy to
Since the
condone.
financial crash, the
become a
top,
national
I think,
policy. And I'm proud to
200
say
people,
that under us
which is 200 people, have tripled their wealth
living
in the
wage
last
to
decade.
its highest ever level. And yes, if you ask me, do I want to...
And he's talking about he
tackle
closed the
poverty
gap.
in your area? Yes, I certainly do. And yes, I certainly want to give every kid in the country the opportunities to make the most of their talents. And that is what I believe in passionately. as a Conservative. I want to see equality of opportunity in this country. I believe that you have talent, genius, ability, uniformly distributed throughout the whole of the UK.
Okay, you're not going to get them on side with one like that, I don't think.
Unleash that potential.
Okay.
That's what I want to do.
Let's hear from Sandeep Gill. Whereabouts?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Firstly, Mr Johnson, I'd like to say, whilst you're in South Yorkshire, I hope you managed to stay dry, unlike a lot of the residents in the past month. So, my question...
Of course, you're talking about the flooding.
Yeah, talking about flooding. As a working single mother, I rely on benefits to get by and just about manage to sustain myself and my 2 children. Under the Conservative government, what guarantee do I have of staying on this side of the food banks?
None.
We will...
None.
First of all, about the flooding,
None. The food bank use under the Tory government has gone through the
everybody
roof.
whose lives have been affected by flooding gets the compensation and the help that they need. And you've seen our announcement that every home is going to get, every damaged home is going to get at least £5,000 to help them with with repairs, and in addition to what we're doing to help with council tax and other things. And we'll also help with insurance. But on your basic question about tackling poverty, of course we want to deal with not just the expression of poverty, but also with the causes of poverty. And that means dealing with educational standards. It means spreading ambition and hope around the country by investing in education, investing in social services, adult and child social services as we are now. Also, it's not just a question of the living wage, it's also a question of helping people with the cost of living. And that's why we're cutting national insurance contributions and trying to put more, doing things to help people with the cost of their heating, their fuel bills, and putting more money into people's pockets every year. We want to help people.
He's not saying anything, is he?
How much is cutting those
He's
national
not
insurance levels?
saying how he's just going to get more money into this and more money into that and more money everywhere.
How much is that going to save people every week?
Whereas for a decade they've just gone, no, we've got no money.
It's not a huge. It's only £100 a year to begin with.
£100 a year.
But it's £500 a year. It's £500 a year once we've got to our ambition.
You say it's 500, but it's
once
under 100.
Once we've got to our ambition of 12,000, a threshold of 12,500. And I want to do more.
Hang on, let's let Sandeep back in.
Sorry, Sandeep.
You're promising that, yet I'm yet to be moved on to universal credit. How does that work? I'm going to lose money, and yet you're promising more relief in other areas. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, Sandeep, I'm very happy to talk afterwards about what we can do to help your specific case. But
there's millions like that around the country, Boris. Are you going to talk to them all individually, are they? The problem here isn't that the fact you've got a universal credit system there that isn't there as a safety net. It's there as your final solution in trying to kill off the poor and the disabled. That's the fucking problem.
Women in the workforce than ever before, and actually incomes are starting to grow faster than any time in the last 12 years. So and that is what we want to focus on.
The man at the back in the grey suit.
Hello, Mr. Johnson.
If he had gone through the universal credit system like I had, he wouldn't be standing there fucking saying that.
Person between 18 and 25 years old vote for the Conservative Party without using campaign rhetoric. Just straight answer, please.
Well, thank you.
Without using campaign rhetoric. Brexit brings Brexit, and more than ready, and get Brexit done.
That is going to do the most to help you to get a fantastic high-wage, high-skilled job.
What about all the debt I'm about to graduate with?
And help you to get a home by building record numbers of homes. Help you to get onto the housing.
In 2014, they said they were going to build 200,000 starter homes. They didn't build any.
We built a record number last year, and we have a plan to build 1 million homes.
Hang on, wait a minute. I think this is so much groaning here. I assume you're thinking of the Conservative pledge to build 200,000 starter homes in 2014.
Exactly what I was talking about.
Well, actually, if you look at what we've done just last
Zero.
year, we built 240,000 homes, which was more than any year
private
in the last 31 years, bar one. And of those, 57,000 were affordable homes. And if you look at, I don't want to go on my record, if you look at my record as Mayor of London, we outbuilt Labour by miles when I was Mayor of London. We will build the homes for young people growing up in this country. We will also make sure that they have the jobs to go to, and we will. I'll answer that. The answer is.
I think you better, because it's not the second time he's asked it.
If he's allowed to shout out like that, I'm perfectly happy to answer. And we will, just to complete this point, and we will put in the transport infrastructure that, as I say, and improving education, that will allow us to unite and level up this country. That is what I want to do. Now,
the question was, when will you release the Russian report?
Let me tell you.
This is the report into whether or not
after the election
interference or any kind of
there is absolutely no evidence that I know.
If that's the case, then why not release it?
Because of the United States releasing theirs on the 9th.
In any British electoral event.
That's why you can't tell you.
I won't, is I see
that one's got to come out first.
I decided not to ages ago, because I see
no
reason
mess about the American
to interfere with the normal timetable.
The normal timetable. Hold on. That's not true.
The American.
That is not true. Dominic Grieve said it should have been released.
Investigation into the Russiagate investigation.
What do you make of this response?
Well, I understand it, and I.
Okay, no, please, you have to let Mr. Johnson answer.
This is real. I'm sorry to say, and with great respect, so this is complete Bermuda Triangle stuff. There is no, as is the suggestion.
If that's the case,
can you see how calm his voice is here?
The referendum, when 17.4 million people voted to leave, was somehow false.
Can you see up until that point he's waffling, and then all of a sudden he's not, and he's clear and he's clarity. Yeah, there's nothing. There's no.
People of this country voted to leave. They've waited 3.5 years
Nobody's
to
saying
get that
cancel
done.
the referendum. We're just
Some people are saying cancel the
referendum.
referendum. I think at least the Liberal Democrats are saying scrub the referendum, and so well, that's my impression of it. Aren't they saying revoke Article 50?
Not over Russian interference, they're not.
We've had an answer to that. We'll spend the next 15 minutes talking about the report, and it may be to you, and I respect that, but we've had an awful lot of other questions, and I'd like to take one now from Olive Enekido. Forgive me, this is not just
He's
going to
get kicked out. That lad is.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to stop there. Otherwise, it's just not fair on everyone else who've got their hands up. It just becomes an evening just for you, and that's not right. So let's hear from... No, let's hear... I think you've got as much an answer as you're going to get. Can we hear... Hang on a minute. I am in charge of this thing. Can you just wait a minute? Can we hear now from Olive Enekido Lynham? Olive, yes.
Hi, Prime Minister. Racist rhetoric in this country is completely rife. Will you admit that you have personally contributed to this and say the words, I'm sorry?
Well, I just want to say...
The answer is no. He won't.
No, I want to say, look, I've written many millions of words in my life as a journalist, and I genuinely never intended to cause hurt or pain to anybody, and that is my intention. What I will say, because I think you're referring to a particular article of a year or so ago, more than that.
Well, there's a few. In fairness, there's a few articles. So there's the Muslim women going around looking like letterboxes, which was last year. You referred to tribal warriors with watermelon smiles and flag-waving pickaninnies, and then just to get another demographic in, tank-topped bum boys.
Well, if you go through all my articles with a fine-tooth comb, you can and take out individual phrases. There is no doubt that you can find things that can be made to seem offensive, and of course, and I understand that. But what I will say, just on the point that I think the lady was referring to, Olive was referring to. I defend my right to speak out, and I do defend my right to. And if you actually read the piece, which I don't know how many people have, if you read the piece, what I was really doing, I suggest you read any of them or all of them. What I was really doing was mounting a strong liberal defence of the right of women in this country to wear what they choose.
That is true.
People, and not to be oppressed into wearing something they don't
read the article.
want to wear. And I think most people in this country would agree with that.
So Olive's asking if you'll say I'm sorry, but...
Well,
you don't think you should say I'm sorry?
I've just got to get back to my my fundamental point. I think that I've always stood up for gender equality. I campaigned. If you look at the way I ran City Hall, I campaigned.
That article he's talking about, that's the one where he likened
male-female team. The number one campaign I ran.
They said that he likened Muslims who
was for 12 years of
burqas to
letterboxes for every girl in the world, which, by the way,
it was a passionate defence of Muslims and their right to defend whatever they wanted. There was nothing wrong with the article. He inserted certain things in there to make the left lose their fucking minds, which is exactly what happened. That's what it was. He used similes.
My question's about the NHS.
You can't ban
I'd just
similes.
like to back up Olive's point. You just talk about defending the freedoms of women. You don't do that by taking down a religious minority. You don't do that by offending Muslim women. That's not how you ensure
Again,
equality for all women.
that he wasn't offending Muslim women. He was using similes to make a point.
We may come to that. Let's just stay on the subject.
She didn't read the article.
On the NHS.
Well, I'm going to come to the NHS in a moment, so if you'll forgive me. Let's a question here.
I think the way that you speak about Muslim women in particular and the way that you've spoken about race in the past is completely characteristic of the way your government has dealt with all the issues it's come up across since 2010. It's been characterised by complete carelessness, by callousness, the way you treated people through the DWP, the way you treated the victims of Grenfell, the hostile environment. It's completely... Well, you say you visited hospitals and you've spoken to public service workers, but I think you yourself know you haven't been welcome when you've been to speak to them. The way you've conducted yourself when you've been there has shown that you're afraid of the response you're going to get. So I think it's insulting to the people who've suffered under your government, even if you say you've only been, in power for 100 days. You've been part of the government for the last 9 years. I think it's completely insulting for you to stand there and talk about all the investment you're going to bring when it's your austerity policies that have brought...
I like this debate. This is good. There's no questions. It's just the audience members having a go at him. All debates should be like this. Forget the questions. Just line people up and just
actually in this
say something horrible to Boris.
Unlike other parties, we have zero tolerance of Islamophobia. We do, and people are asked to stand down if they're guilty of Islamophobia or any other prejudice or any other hate speech, and that is what we. That's what we do, and I'm delighted. And we are going to have an inquiry into prejudice of all kinds to anticipate the question that.
But you're not having an inquiry, an external inquiry into Islamophobia as you promised on television.
And yes, we are. We're having an inquiry into all Islamophobia and all types of prejudice in the Conservative Party. Of course, we will do that. But I think, we will begin by the end of this year if we're lucky enough to be returned. And let me be clear that I'm proud of the record of the Conservative Party in promoting women to which party has produced two female prime ministers? Ours. It's a fair. We have large numbers of women in the cabinet today. I'm delighted to say, and we have a very large and growing number. We have at least 35% of our candidates at this election are female, and I'm delighted by our record.
Yeah, and all of them will fuck you on your universal credit.
Under the Conservatives, the gender pay
women
gap
can be
has
assholes
shrunk,
too.
And we are doing everything we can to help women into the workforce, not least through childcare policies, some of which I announced today.
Well, we have another question on your record. There's a forest of hands, so I'm going to try and get to as many as I can, but let's hear from
Do you want me to
Richard...
just take down some questions and then try and answer
Well,
them?
let's just hear a question from Richard Cocker, first of all. Yes.
Good evening, Prime Minister. In 2015, the Tory government pledged to recruit and to train an additional 5,000 GPs by 2020. In 2019, there are actually fewer GPs. Why on earth should I now believe yet another pledge that you will recruit an additional 6,000 GPs over the course of the next Parliament?
We're going to have 5,000 more. We've got less now. We're going to have 6,000 more.
I think, to the best of my knowledge, we have 5,000 more doctors. I appreciate it's not the same as GPs. We have 5,000 more doctors this year than last year. We are making progress.
But his point is that pledges have been made before and have not been delivered. So why should he believe your pledge this time?
Because look at what we've done already with nurses. There are 17,000 more nurses now than there were in 2010. I'm afraid it's a...
But what about having fewer GPs than in 2015?
And yes, look, I mean, if you want my
You said you were going to get more GPs and we've got fewer. What do you say about that? Well, we've got more nurses.
Investment in the NHS, and we're putting in now the biggest ever cash boost into the NHS under this One Nation Conservative government. And we will get more GPs, 54 million GP appointments, more GP appointments between now and 2025. We will do that because we are putting the sums in. It's not just that we're building.
The question was, if you remember, you promised 5,000 before. How can we believe you now? And his answer is, believe us, we're going to put 6,000 this time.
As a result of the decisions
Prime
that we've
Minister,
taken.
it's 6.
No, as
It's
a result
6.
of the decisions that we have taken, in 10 years' time, 40 new hospitals will have been built.
No, it's not.
And yes, we're starting.
No, it's
yes,
6 hospitals.
It is 6, just so we're
yes,
clear.
we're starting with 6.
It's not
but there are
40.
So it's not
on
20.
the programme.
At the moment, it's upgrading 6 existing hospitals.
No, sorry, no, it's building 6 new ones immediately, but a programme over the next 10 years with seed funding already going in to build 40 new hospitals.
Do you want to?
This is a con.
I do.
40 new
With
hospitals
respect,
is not going to happen.
We do need a lot of extra cash in the NHS, and it's through years of underinvestment that we're actually in the position that we're in.
Well, I agree with that.
Thank you.
He agrees
But,
that his party is
it's
not
more
invested in
about
the
conditions.
NHS.
It's as much
It's
about
great,
the
isn't it?
conditions as it is about the money.
He's just agreed.
You know, the morale in the NHS is on its knees. The workload is going through the roof. We can't keep the GPs that are close to retirement from retiring because they just see this and they think, I want out. When we're trying to train new GPs to come into the service, they see all of this and they think, do I want to stay in England? We've invested hundreds of thousands of pounds in their training. And they look and think, do I want to commit the next 40 years of my career here? Or am I going to go to Australia, New Zealand, Canada? And they go there, they work 40 hours instead of 60-hour weeks. They get better pay. They don't have a political football. They don't get treated like a political football. We need to look at the conditions as well as the money that's been invested.
I totally agree with that.
Make that man stand for.
I totally
I'll vote
agree
for
with
him.
that, and I admire massively the work
I'll vote for that
all
guy.
the staff do in the NHS. And I have to say, I think your point is right. And many doctors, many senior doctors, have made the point to me, particularly about their pension arrangements, and we're trying to address.
Not enough money in the NHS
further steps
because his
to,
party has
address
been
that
dismantling
this
it
year.
for the last decade.
I know that the problem that doctors face, but we're also recruiting huge numbers. And I just
To
say
pay for a
sincerely to
bailout
people,
of the banks.
The only way we can do this
Because some
is by
bankers
having a
lost some
strong
money.
economy.
And
And
you pay
what I'm
for it.
afraid to say, and that is the reality, the economy
Fair,
has grown
isn't it?
every year for the last 9 years. It's now 20% bigger than it was. And when Labour left office last time, as with every departing Labour government, they
Joe,
left an economic shambles.
that was a broken system.
What was proposed yesterday.
Broken
not only is there
system.
a
That was
vast hole in
30
the
years
heart
in the
of it,
making,
sense we don't know
mate.
what their Brexit policy is, but their economic plans for this country.
But people
would be
want to ask you
utterly
about your
ruinous.
plans, Mr.
And
Johnson.
it would make us.
So-
I'll tell you.
No,
we
wait
are
a
going
minute.
to
No,
continue
wait a minute.
to
There's
fund
so
the
many
NHS.
hands up, and we've got so few minutes left. So I'm going to try and have as sort of few hands as I can. Yes, I'll do about 3 or 4. If you keep your questions brief. The man with the glasses.
I'm a physiotherapist, and the problem is across the board in the NHS. Part of the problem was getting rid of the NHS bursary, which stopped a lot of mature students coming back. I wouldn't have been able to train without that bursary, and you've shut a lot of people out with that. So would you reverse that decision to help get people back in?
OK, let's take a couple more. The woman with the glasses here.
I'm a junior doctor in A&E in the NHS, and over the past 9 years since you've been in power, I've seen that waiting lists are getting longer. People are in trolleys for hours and hours in A&E, and it's not just inconvenient. People are dying, and I think you're lying to us. Every year you promise more money for the NHS, but the reality is people in the NHS, people who work there and who use it, know that that money isn't getting through. Why should we trust that you're going to get this 26 billion for the NHS when you've got years of cuts and people are dying?
Average person on the street, that's what they'll say. That's the average person on the street, and he won't have an answer for
A
it.
big part of the election process is all about the trust that you want us to put into you. And even in this sort of campaign over the last week, we've seen Twitter handles that have been changed by the Conservatives. We've seen URLs that have been bought purporting to be from Labour, I think. And you're asking us to put our trust in big decisions, but yet even simple things, you can't seem to get that right. So why on earth should we trust you with anything else?
Well, look at what.
He's ageing really quickly, I agree.
Let's get back to this central
He's
issue.
ageing really quickly,
Look at what
Boris
I
Johnson
said I would do when I set out to be Mayor of London 10 years ago. I said,
No, in fairness, Mr Johnson, that's not the question. The question about the NHS is about trust.
I'm having questions about whether I can deliver. We massively cut crime. I promised to cut crime, and we did. We had a huge investment, very substantially, and 50% cut in the murder rate. We massively invested in transport, and cut delays on the tube by 30%. We outbuilt the Labour Party when it came to housing. I over-delivered on my promises. When you look at what I promised on the steps of Downing Street a few months ago, three or so months ago, I promised we'd put 20,000 more police on the streets of our country. They're coming there. I've talked to them. They are being recruited now. I said that we would put the biggest ever cash boost into the NHS, and it is happening. And we're doing, as I say, 20 hospital upgrades and 40 new hospitals. And to get to all the points that are being raised, yes, of course, I understand that things have been tough in the NHS, and I understand the pressures that the NHS is under. But as I say, I've talked to hundreds of doctors and nurses in the last few months. I know the massive, massive demand that the NHS faces. But we can only meet that demand. We can only meet that demand if we have a dynamic economy. And I'm afraid we won't get this economy really moving again. We won't get the investment coming in, and you know what I'm going to say, until we get, it's true, it happens to be true, until we get Brexit done. And at the moment, that is hanging over us, it's paralysing Parliament, and to get back to your trust point, that is, in my view, the single biggest corrosion of trust in politics. People voted 3.5 years ago for their will to be respected. Every other party that you've had on tonight is basically trying to frustrate that outcome. We have a deal, and it's a good deal. It will allow us. It's a great deal. It's there. It's ready to go. It's as I never tire of saying, oven ready.
Okay, we're out of time. I'm so sorry.
That's all he's got.
It will enable us to have 2020. Not as a year of
Mr. Johnson,
pointless
so sorry, we're out of
referendums,
time.
but 2020 as a year of prosperity and growth.
Thank you.
That's what I want to see.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. So, thank you very much to Boris Johnson.
I think that's it, isn't it? That's the 4 of them. This will probably end now.
And that concludes our evening. It's been...
Yeah, so that's it. That's it all done. That's the second of the debates. Well, I suppose this is just questions tonight. Things to take away. The big loser of the night is Joe Swinson, without a doubt. That was a disaster for Joe Swinson, an absolute disaster, and I expected it, to be honest, because she's got a way of holding herself and delivering her words in a way that you just look at it and you just think there's no substance behind this woman. You can see she's just going through the motions and saying, the words, but there's no conviction behind it. And when her back was against it, and when somebody really, when she was up against somebody who was like, look at what your track record. Yeah, she disintegrated. I fear for Joe Swinson's seat, because I honestly, I said the other night, the Scottish National Party are going to clear up in Scotland, and obviously her seat's up there. Going to be in trouble. So yeah, she's the big loser of the night. In third place, I would say Boris Johnson came third. Somebody just asked, Robert Hickey just said, if you were there, what would you have asked Boris? I would say, why are you torturing a journalist for publishing the truth about America? Why do you want to ship him off to Donald Trump? I would badger him about the Julian Assange thing, obviously. He looks like he's aging very quickly. I know a few people in the chat were saying he looks really old. We'll see how that job stresses people out. Tony Blair went grey in about 5 seconds, didn't he? Good. I hope it was really difficult for you, mate. Bojo, yeah, he had a difficult day. I expected more slogans from him. I think he'll probably ramp that up in the coming weeks. There'll be more Get Brexit Done and Oven Ready Brexit and dither and delay with the Labour Party, because that's all he's got, is soundbites and slogans. You can see there when the average person on the street actually collars him and asks him a real question, there is no answer that he's got. Jeremy Corbyn had a good day. I think Jeremy Corbyn did well. That was a solid 8.5, I thought, out of 10. And I definitely think, as I thought at the very beginning, remember when I did my show last week before the election sort of, started, he'll close that gap. If there is a gap in the polls, I think the polls are there more to influence opinion than inform it. So I won't be using them in any of the run up to the election. He's gonna if he has got a lead, it's gonna get eroded away, because Corbyn is hitting the ground running. I've said many a time, if he is within 5 points of coming election, forget it, he's going to win. I think he's a bit further behind than that because he's lost the Midlands and the North. I can see him getting a lot of people back there who he's lost, because, at the end of the day, if you get Brexit tomorrow, your life won't change that much. It really won't. Your life of people up and down the country won't change that much if you get Brexit. Not immediately, anyway. Certainly won't change for the better. But if you get universal credit scrapped, your life might change for the better. If you get more money put into, you see where I'm going here. He had a good night, but the big winner for me tonight was Nicola Sturgeon. She was excellent. She answered questions directly and was forthright in them when there were difficult questions. She didn't shirk the responsibility. She was honest. And, they asked her about the Trident and they asked her about the referendum, Scottish referendum, and getting into bed with the Labour Party, and she was honest, and she just said, listen, yeah, okay, yeah, he's saying the one thing now, but you wait until after the results of the election, because if the results mean that he needs us, he'll give us that referendum in a nanosecond, which is obviously right, of course he will. So, like I said the other day, it's not really up to Parliament to decide what the Scottish people want. It's up to the Scottish people. That was the way I thought the other day. So yeah, all in all, terrible night for Jo Swinson. That's gonna hurt her, I would have thought, if people watched that. A bad night for Boris Johnson. He certainly hasn't gained any new followers as a result of that. Decent for Jeremy Corbyn. He will have gained ground, but the big winner there is Nicola Sturgeon. I covered this, this live stream. I did it at the last second. I forgot all about that debate until the last second, hence why when I started this stream, I was walking about in the background setting everything up. But hopefully you enjoyed it. I want to say this. I want to end on this. I watched the Democratic debates over in America, as you know. I think there's been 5 so far, and I think I've watched 3 of them. And what you just saw was in oodles of time, millions of times better than the debates over in America. And what you saw the other night between Bojo and Jeremy Corbyn on ITV was millions of times better than the DNC. We cannot let our TV go down to the standard that it is over there, because it was laughable. The last DNC debate that I watched. So hopefully our TV is going to, keep the production value up as high as it was tonight. That was pretty good, I thought. That was pretty good format. They had more than a few seconds to give their responses, and you really saw who was the wafflers there with Corbyn and Swinson, and who I think had a good night. Let me know what you think in the comments as to who won, who the biggest winners were, whether you thought Nicola Sturgeon had won, like I do. It's going to be interesting, this run up to the election, to see what happens. But Jo Swinson, there were talk, I estimated that the Lib Dems might get 50 plus seats, back to 2010 levels. If she performs like that, she might lose her own seat. I think she's in trouble. Thanks very much for watching. Please make sure you subscribe. Click the bell below to get a notification when I drop further videos. And click through to the website as well to find out ways to support me. I can't do this without your support, and I really appreciate it. Support independent media. Let's make Orwell fiction again. Take care, everyone. See you tomorrow.